Every so often a story comes to me that not only tugs at my heartstrings but plays them like a fiddle while forcing me through a new kind of hell. You're about to hear one such story about a camping trip, a good man, and the thing in the woods that ruined the lives of an entire family. This well-paced and at times intense story comes to us from someone named Danny. He titled it Uncle Nick. My Uncle Nicholas was the best man I've ever known. The end of his story is the worst day of my family's life. But that's not where it starts, and it's not where he belongs. It starts on our living room floor with a deck of Yu-Gi-Oh cards. A grown man in his 20s sitting cross-legged and arguing trade values with a 7-year-old like it was the stock exchange. He was my dad's little brother by 6 years. He lived 20 minutes away, never had a wife or kids of his own, and he worked maintenance at the community college. He was at our house probably 3 nights a week. Every kid should get one adult like that. Somebody who's family but isn't in charge of you, who shows up with a Nintendo 64 game they rented, and no opinions about what your grades are. He's the one who had the gold Ocarina of Time cartridge, and he would bring it over in a plastic grocery bag, like it was illegal paraphernalia. My brother Aaron and I would fight about who got the controller, until Uncle Nick solved it the same as he usually did, which was that Aaron got to play, and I got to read the strategy guide out loud, being the boss of the map. Nick sat between us on the floor, leaning on the couch, calling out, "Watch for the ceiling hands," during the Shadow Temple. He didn't have to spend his weekends doing that, but he did it anyway for years. And he was a big camper. That was his whole other life. Nick was in the woods almost every weekend, sometimes alone or sometimes with a buddy. And he came back from those trips with stories that made my brother and I insane with wanting to go. One time he said a copperhead was in his boot, and on another time he said a black bear stole his entire cooler, carrying it off like a lunchbox. He would tell these stories at our kitchen table, his hands doing little recreations. My mom would say, "Nicholas, now they're not going to get any sleep." And he'd wink at us, and we would in fact not sleep. We'd either be creeped out, or talking about how cool that was, or we'd talk about what we would do if we were in that situation. He begged my dad for years to let him take us. I mean years. I was there for a lot of the begging. Nick didn't do it privately. He would do it at dinner, like a lawyer making a motion he knew would get denied. "Dave, it's car camping. The truck is right there the whole time." When Danny's older. Aaron's 9 though. I was sleeping outside alone at 9. "And look how you turned out," my dad would say, and Nick would grab his own chest like he was shot. That was the routine over and over for years. It was never really a fight. My dad wasn't scared of the woods and he wasn't scared of Nick. He just had a thing, which I understand now that I have my own kids, that thing about both of his sons being somewhere he wasn't. "When Danny's 10, he finally said one night, when I was 8 years old, to get Nick to stop asking. Both of them together though, or neither, and when Danny is 10. So the year I turned 10 was the year. All of that history is why the first trip was what it was to us. It wasn't just a camping trip. It was the thing we had literally been waiting for a third of our lives. Nick showed up that afternoon with the truck already loaded, and a brand new sleeping bag for each of us, tags still on them, which on his paycheck was not nothing. My mom took a picture of the 3 of us by the tailgate that I still have, and in it, Nick smiling so big his eyes are shut. He took us to a spot he just kept calling the Pines, in the National Forest a couple hours from home. He'd picked it for us, I understood later. A beginner spot, with an easy half-mile walk in from where you park, a big flat established site, and a fire ring already there. There was even a creek down the hill you could hear from your tent. Nothing about it was scary or hard. He spent that whole first day being the best version of a person I've maybe ever seen, teaching us to set up a tent and then took it down and made us do it ourselves. Then we all cheered like idiots when we set it up. He let Aaron use the hatchet under supervision, Then we cooked hot dogs and s'mores, and then, because we were still hungry, the way boys usually are, a second round of hot dogs. It was the best day of my childhood up to that point. Full stop. And it stayed the best day right up until about 9 o'clock that night. Because after dark, Nick got out the flashlights and said, "You want to see something cool?" And he took us down to the creek. That part was his tradition, I found out at the funeral, from a buddy he used to camp with. Nick liked to walk to water in the dark and turn the flashlight on the creek because the crawdad eyes shine back at you like little coals. And it worked. It was really cool. We crouched on the rocks. Aaron caught one with his hands, and it pinched him. I've never laughed harder. 10 years old, pitch dark woods, my uncle's hand on the back of my jacket so I didn't go into the creek. My brother was yelping and flapping his hand. That was probably still the best hour of my childhood. We started back up the hill to camp around, 10. We went single file on the path. Aaron was in front with a flashlight, and I was in the middle, with Nick behind me. We were about halfway up, when Nick put his hand on my shoulder and said to us, "Hold up," quietly. He clicked his light off and told Aaron to click his off too. We stood in the dark. Then I heard what he had been hearing. Footsteps, off to our left and up the slope in the leaves. They weren't too close, but they were moving. Then they would stop, and I remember thinking even at 10 years old, that not hearing it move anymore was the scarier part. It seemed to stop only a moment after we stopped. "Deer?" Aaron said. "Probably," Nick said. He then moved me by the shoulder so I was in front of him and moved himself to the back of our line, in reference to us and the sound. And he said, "Keep walking on up, guys. Don't run, just walk on." So we walked, and then the footsteps continued, walking too alongside us. I know I was young and it was dark, so I know I've had a lot of years to bend this memory, but this part I'd swear to in court. The steps kept pace with us off to our left the whole way up that hill in the leaves, matching us. And every time we'd stop for a second at Nick's hand, they'd take 1 or 2 more steps and stop too. Always just a little bit late. About halfway back, Nick started to talk, real loud and cheerful. But I knew him, I knew his voice. That was his fake voice. He was saying, "Almost there, boys. Hot chocolate when we get up. Who wants some hot chocolate?" It was the first time in my life I ever heard an adult be scared. He was talking to put a wall of sound between us and the left side of the dark. We got to camp and the fire had burned down to almost nothing. Nick told us to sit tight at the picnic table, together, and he went to build the fire back up, constantly looking over at us, making sure we were still where we should be. But the fire just wouldn't go. I didn't understand at the time what I was watching. I've camped my whole life since, thanks to him, so I know exactly now what I was seeing. A man who had built 1,000 campfires could not get a fire to restart from live coals. He put dry pine straw on coals that were still orange and it sat there. It didn't catch and curl the way pine straw does, even if you just look at it wrong. He got down and blew on it and the coals brightened, but the straw just sat there. Then he quit pretending it was a normal problem. He went to the truck box and came back with a bottle of charcoal starter and squeezed half that bottle on the whole ring, then struck a lighter to it. I watched a lighter flame touch starter fluid, and nothing happened. He struck it and touched it again. Nothing. The third time he was saying something under his breath. It wasn't even cussing is the thing. I was close enough to hear that it wasn't. Years later, I'd figure out what it probably was. His lips were moving in the same little rhythm you see at church. He was praying. The steps came back, down at the edge of the site, past the tents in the dark where the ground slopes to the creek. They were faster now, lighter and faster. A rush of steps, followed by quiet, then another rush of steps, closer, and my whole life I found only one word for the sound, and I hate that word. Skittering. like something with more feet than it needed, coming up the hill in bursts. That's when Aaron grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise it. Nick stood up between us, facing that darkness with a lighter in his fist. And suddenly, by some weird chance, the fire caught. It blazed, too, thanks to all of the starter fluid he had poured on it. That thing just decided suddenly, oh yeah, I'm a fire, I should probably start now. So the whole ring all at once went up, with a sort of whump that I felt on my face. This hot orange daylight punched out 30 feet in every direction, basically a bit of an explosion. And at the edge of that new light, right where it died into the trees, there was a face going backward. I have only one frame of it, like a frozen frame of a video game. Just that single, still image in my head, because that's as long as it lasted in that moment. That's how long that face was there. Its eyes were open. Its face was so long and pale, with cheeks sunk in so deep, the head looked more like skull than face. It was pulling out of the light as fast as it could, as if the light burned it. But it was gone instantly, enshrouded by the dark and heading fast into the woods. We were left in that camp then, with an orange and flickering normalness. Nobody said anything for a second. Then Nick said, "There it goes," in a weird, bright voice. And then Aaron said, "What was that?" Nick said, "Oh, that was just a big ol' owl. The fire probably spooked it." He then made us hot chocolate in a hurry, but his hands were shaky, I could see that. I watched him miss the cup a bit when he was pouring things in there. He told us owl facts for 20 minutes in that same bright voice. We wanted to believe him so bad that we mostly did. I'd say by bedtime I was 80% convinced it was an owl. We were kids. We wanted the world to be okay, whether we were right or wrong. That night, I woke up way late, hours in with Aaron dead asleep next to me. I heard a voice outside the tent, a calm and conversational voice, coming from out past our fire ring. It sounded like Uncle Nick, but I couldn't hear the exact words, just a tone, steady, back and forth, with these silent patches where the other half of a conversation would go. I remember thinking, okay, Uncle Nick's talking to someone, and feeling completely safe about that. After all, to me, Uncle Nick's voice was calm. So I rolled back over and went to sleep. 10-year-old logic. The voice was calm, so everything was fine. I heard one word clear as I was going under. I'll never be sure if it's a real memory or something my brain built. But the word was okay. Twice, with a space in between. Okay. Okay. Like an agreement was made. We told our parents about the owl that we had spooked at our campsite. Nick backed us up, telling them about it in a funny way. Then in later retellings, he did a whole bit about how the owl stole my hot dog. That trip went into our family legend as a giant success. And honestly, as far as any of us knew, it was one. He had us begging to go again. It took a while. Uncle Nick seemed to get busier than ever after that. But the next year he took us out again, to a different spot, a lake this time, for a camping/fishing trip. The fishing trip is where I first saw that something was wrong with Uncle Nick. It was small stuff. He was still Nick, still funny and endlessly patient, tying our hooks on. Aaron and I produced nothing but birds' nests of fishing line for the first 2 days. But something in him had changed. Something I couldn't put my finger on yet. He checked behind us frequently. On the trail, at the boat launch, at the fire, he had this new habit of turning around, casually but very frequently, like stretching his back and reading the trees for a second, before turning back to whatever we were doing. He parked the truck nose out, keeping the fire real big, way bigger than a cook fire needs to be, and he fed it constantly, When Aaron mentioned it, poking fun at him by calling him a pyromaniac, Nick grinned and said, Fire's the whole point of camping, bud. And I don't want to risk that same situation from last time, remember? We did remember, and I didn't like to remember. I watched him throw another log on the fire. He was wearing a whistle now, too. A small plastic whistle on a cord around his neck the whole trip. He looked like a camp counselor. When I asked what it was for, he said, If we ever get separated, 3 blasts means come to me. You hear 3 whistles, you drop the fishing pole, everything you're doing, and you come find me. Then he made us practice it out loud like a fire drill, both of us reciting the whistle roll back. It's a completely normal safety thing. They teach it in Scouts, so I'm told. It was also brand new, the 4th trip of my life, and he had never once mentioned it before. On the 3rd night, we were at the fire, stuffed on crappie he'd fried in a pan, and Aaron, who was 13 at the time, and had recently discovered the joy of scary stuff, goes, Hey, Uncle Nick, what's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to you out here? You gotta be for real, too. Not like you ran into a bear or something. Nick poked at the fire with a stick. Then he told us this, and I can hear it all in my head like it happened yesterday. All right, I'll go for it one time. If your mom asks, we talked about fishing, though, deal? We nodded. Well, when I was 19, way before you two existed, I went out by myself to a piece of forest, north of the pines. It was further in than I'd ever been, way off trail. I was 19 and I felt immortal. The plan was just one night. I'll walk in the morning, camp, walk out the next day, and the whole first day was fine, except it was really quiet. You get quiet patches in the woods sometimes. Birds knock off, everything holds its breath for a moment, but then it always starts back up. But this one didn't start back up. Quietest woods I've ever stood in. A whole day, too. I went ahead and made camp in it anyway, on account of being 19, as I said before. So around dusk, I'm out gathering wood. I'm whistling while I do it. Some song I don't even remember. Didn't even know I was doing it either. But that's when, I swear to you, the woods whistled it back. He stopped there and cleared his throat. The two of us remained glued to our seats. It was the same tune I whistled, and it came from off east in the trees. I stopped, then it stopped. I stood there telling myself it was some kind of bird. There are birds out there that'll mimic you perfectly. That's a real thing. I then heard the 4 notes again, closer, but the pitch had been shifted. It wasn't as right as it was before. I didn't sleep out there. I sat up against a tree all night with my fire and my knife, and I heard something out there moving around me the whole night, in big, slow circles, and it stayed where the light quit. This is where his story went from campfire spooky to something else entirely. Nick's voice changed, and he quit doing the storyteller thing with his hands. And then, about the worst part of the night, 3, 4 in the morning, it called me. Called you what? Aaron said. It called my name, in my dad's voice. He poked the fire again. Your grandpa was 300 miles away, sleeping in his bed. And yet I heard his voice coming out of those trees, only a few feet off from me. It said to me, Nicky, come help me with this. So nonchalant. Come help me with this. Listening to his story, I felt goosebumps on my arm. Aaron had quit chewing entirely. I'll tell you boys the only smart thing I did that whole trip. I didn't talk to it. I didn't answer it. I knew somehow deep down, like instinctually, don't talk to it. That if I did, something would start. something bad. So I sat there with my mouth shut all night while my dad's voice tried different things to get me to come to it. "Come help me, Nicky. I'm hurt." Whatever, I thought. Then there were other voices I heard too. A buddy of mine, a girl I knew. It tried on different ones to see which made me budge, but none of them did. The moment the sun came up, first light, it quit. It gave up. And I immediately packed my things and walked out of there at a dead sprint. Then came the part he told like a punchline, and yet I never once found it funny. So I get to my car. There's a ticket on it from the police, and it's got a date. Apparently I'd been in those woods 3 days. Not a single night, but 3 days. To me, it was one bad night and back home. But no, your grandpa had already called the sheriff about me. I really lost track of time, I guess. He laughed and shrugged. Anyway, that's my creepy story. There's weird stuff way back in the big woods, boys. The rule is you don't answer it. Never follow it either. And if you do that, it can't do a thing to you. It's all bark. I smirked and rolled my eyes at that terrible pun. We must have looked like two owls ourselves, though, at the end of that story. He took one look at our faces and absolutely died laughing, falling off the log sideways, saying, oh man, your faces," and it broke the spell. Inside 10 minutes, he had us laughing too, and the night rolled on into normalcy. Marshmallows and an argument about whether Blue Eyes White Dragon could beat Godzilla. He can. Then we went to bed. That night, I woke up needing to pee. I lay there, taking a moment to gather my courage to leave the tent. But that's when I heard a man crying. It was undoubtedly coming from Nick's tent. Very quiet and held down crying, like he had an arm or a sleeping bag over his mouth. It went on and on, low and steadily, just 10 feet from my own head. My uncle, the funniest, easiest, most alive person I knew, alone in a nylon tent in the dark, crying, like something was broken that could not be fixed, and he was trying really hard to be quiet about it. I didn't get up. I held it until morning. I lay there until the sound stopped, and it took a long time. I never did tell Nick that I heard him crying, and I did not tell Aaron. At breakfast, Nick made griddle cakes. Tried to make them in the shape of our initials, but it was kind of a mess. He acted completely his old self. 11-year-old me stopped thinking about the crying. Maybe it was some girlfriend thing. And I let myself forget about it. If I had to guess now, I think he had brought it up that night. I think he was crying about that story he told at the campfire. That it went deeper than what he let on. And that means that story was true. It was him trying to hand us the rules. Don't answer it. Don't follow it. Dressed up as entertainment for kids. Then he went to his tent, probably couldn't sleep, and cried. That part where he said it's all bark, I don't think it was true. If you ask me, he wasn't able to just walk out of those woods in that story. But what happened in those woods remains a mystery. Because I don't think the thing that circled his camp all night, mimicking voices, I don't think it's something that would just let him stroll out. It let him out. But why? After the fishing trip, life went on. Nothing happened for years. He took us out probably 8 more times through my middle school years, and every single one of those trips was clean. Perfect. He got happier again. Whatever had changed in him changed back. And those middle trips are honestly most of what I think about when I miss him now. He taught Aaron to drive on forest roads with the truck in first gear. He taught me how to tie knots. I still use some of them. For a while, he got obsessed with hammock camping and evangelized it like a religion until a strap let go and slapped him down flat in front of us. Aaron laughed so hard he nearly pulled something. Nick lay in the leaves pointing up at him going, "This is why the tent people win." We didn't hear any strange steps, didn't see any creepy faces, and our fires lit just fine. I stopped flinching at the dark woods somewhere along there, and the first trip finally faded into blurry memory, solidifying the owl as what actually happened. Everything was good until the last trip. On the last trip, everything was wrong from the get-go. I was 15 then. Aaron was 18. He had a truck of his own and a girlfriend, 1 foot out the door of childhood. Honestly, the trip almost didn't happen because Aaron almost had plans. Even the way the trip came together was off. Usually a trip meant 3 weeks of build-up, gear lists, Nick calling the house phone to ask whether we wanted to go after walleye or catfish this time, like a waiter taking our order. This one he put together in 4 days, and when he called about it, he did something he hadn't done since I was 10. He asked for my dad's permission again. I was standing in the kitchen, and I heard my dad go, "What do you mean, am I sure, Nick? They're teenagers. You've taken them 100 times now." Whatever Nick said back, my dad laughed at it, hanging up and shaking his head, saying, "Your uncle's getting weird in his old age." Nick was 41. When he picked us up, I noticed right away that he had lost weight since last we saw him, and that had only been 6 weeks back. This wasn't sickly weight, but enough to notice. And the drive out, which was usually the best part, 3 guys and gas station food with Nick doing bits, it was quiet much of the time. During those quiet patches, he kept doing something with his jaw, like he was rehearsing something under his breath. It was weird. He apologized for the weirdness, and he kept apologizing the entire trip. For everything. For nothing. Like, "Sorry the drive's so long, guys." One time he said, "Sorry, I should have gotten more ice," and we hadn't even complained about the ice. He burned a pancake out of a stack of 12 and apologized like he had burned the house down. At one point, Aaron was trying to make a joke and went, "You good, man? You're being weird." Nick looked at him and said, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't be weird. This is supposed to be fun." And that was the least fun thing he'd ever said. Twice that first full day, we caught him doing the thing with the trees. Let me describe this. The first time I caught him doing this, we had been setting up camp. I turned around to ask him something, and he was standing off in the trees, past the fire ring. He was perfectly still, with his arms down at his sides and his head all the way back. He was staring straight up. Was he looking at a bird or something? I looked up too, to see what he was looking at. There was nothing up there but canopy, leaves and sky through the trees. But he stood there with his face pointing straight up, not moving an inch, and he stayed like that for as long as it took me to go over to him. And that's a longer time than you think. I even called his name twice and got no response. I touched his elbow, and he came back with a start. He genuinely had no idea I was there. He looked at me, and of course he said, "Sorry, what's up?" "Uncle Nick, you were staring at the sky," he replied, completely level. "Oh, was I?" The second time, Aaron found him in the same posture down by the water. He had to shake him to get him to react, actually shake him vigorously. And after that, Aaron and I had a conversation behind the truck. "Something's wrong with Uncle Nick," Aaron said. "I know. Do you think it's like medical wrong or something? Should we go home?" Aaron replied, "He'd never let us. He'd say sorry over and over and guilt us into staying. Maybe he needs us here." We decided we would watch him. If it got worse, we'd make up a reason to leave in the morning. Aaron would say his girlfriend needed him or the truck at home needed something. I really wish we didn't decide to wait. Late in the afternoon, the three of us took the loop trail from the lake back toward camp for a walk. It was around a mile, and we fell into our usual order. Aaron way out front because he only had one speed, me in the middle, and Uncle Nick behind us. I could hear Nick back there the whole way. The trail was dry and loud, and his steps were right behind me the entire time. A steady crunch, crunch, crunch of an adult's weight. Close enough that twice I said something over my shoulder. Some nothing comment about a cool mushroom, and I got a grunt back. Just a mile of that. We came around the last bend into camp, and I froze, because there was Nick at the fire ring in front of us. He was crouched there with the coffee pot in his hand, looking up at us. He said, "There they are. What, did y'all take the long way?" I stared, slack-jawed. Behind me, the crunch-crunch took 2 more steps and stopped too, and I was instantly reminded of those footsteps 5 years earlier, on a dark hill above a creek. I stood there between my uncle at the fire and the sound behind me on the trail, and I wanted so badly to turn around to see who was actually following me this whole time, but I was too scared, so I did not turn around. I walked forward instead, quickly to the fire ring, and Aaron, who had been too far ahead to hear anything strange, was already asking Nick how he beat us back. "Oh, I cut across the draw," Nick said. But he was looking past us at the trail bend. At nothing, I hoped. And his thumb was moving on the coffee pot handle, a little polishing motion, around and around. I didn't say anything. 15-year-old logic is not 10-year-old logic. I wasn't going to blame this one on an owl. But instead, I pushed it way back, and I said I would think about it later. For now, there was dinner to eat. And because I did that, that last evening was pretty perfect beyond the creepy steps. I don't know how he did it. I've come to believe he did it on purpose, made himself do it. He understood what night it was even if we didn't yet. But from dinner on, for about 4 hours, we got our peak Uncle Nick back. All of it. He retold the bear and the cooler story with the full physical reenactment, playing both himself and the bear. He remembered a Yu-Gi-Oh card I'd traded him when I was 8, a time wizard I'd cried about trading, and he'd quietly given it back a week later. He did the whole negotiation again from memory, doing a funny voice for my little kid voice. Aaron laughed the big dumb laugh he'd had since he was born, and the fire was going. At one point, Nick looked at both of us for a second, smiling, and said, "You know, you two are the best things I ever did. And I didn't even do it. It was your dad. I just showed up after." We groaned and smiled. Around 11, we went to bed. Aaron and I were in the 2-man we'd shared our whole lives. Nick's 1-man was across the site, like usual. The last thing I heard as I fell asleep was Nick feeding the fire, the popping and shifting sounds of a big log, which was its own kind of lullaby back then. I woke up, though, at some point. Aaron was fighting with the tent. It took me a second to make sense of what was going on. He was up on his knees at the door in the dark. He had the zipper in his fist, pulling at it, yanking it back and forth in these short, violent jerks. The whole tent was shaking with it. He was cussing at it in a whisper. I looked up and said at him, "What the heck are you doing? I'm trying to sleep." Without looking, he said, "I've got to piss, and the zipper's stuck." "Just force it," I said. He grunted a few times as he kept trying, then said, "It's not stuck like stuck, it's stuck like being held there." From outside, close, maybe 5 feet from the door, we heard our uncle's voice. He said, "Boys, I need you to stop touching that zipper." Both of us went still. That was Nick's voice, but with all the joy sucked out of it. He sounded so emotionless. Aaron backed off the door real slow, and we both stared at the black shape of the tent wall. "Uncle Nick?" Aaron said. "Man, I gotta go pee. Quit playing." "I can't let you out," he said right away. "I need you both to hear me. You cannot come out of that tent tonight. If you stay inside until the sun is up, you will see daylight. Both of you." "What? What are you talking about?" Aaron's voice cracked, like it used to when he was 12. "Uncle Nick, what's going on?" It was quiet for some time, and in the pause I could hear the fire behind Nick. The fire was still going, still popping, which meant he'd been out there feeding it the whole time. For hours it had to be. I pictured him sitting out there alone by a big fire, surrounded by darkness, waiting for whatever this was, and I got a feeling in my chest I'd never had before. Nick's voice returned. "I messed up, guys. A long time ago." I could hear the flat voice from him, now giving out in certain parts. It sounded like he was about to cry. "I did something that I shouldn't have, way before you boys. I was young and scared, and I would have said anything, and I did. I said anything. It doesn't forget. It doesn't take a different answer. I've spent every trip since you were 10 keeping myself between it and you, and I thought I could keep doing this forever. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should never have brought you out here. Not a single time." Aaron was talking over all of it, telling Nick to stop, telling him to open up the tent, saying that we can all get in the truck right now and just go home, or to get Nick some help. I grabbed Aaron's arm, because I'd heard something Aaron had not. It was something off to the left of the door, out in the leaves. Something had started to move. Little rushes, then a stop. More rushing, and a stop. That sound, the one from when I was 10, the skittering sound. It was circling in toward my uncle. And Nick heard it too, because his words started to come out faster. "Listen to me. The truck keys are in my tent, side pocket, and the satellite phone is in the truck console. Aaron, say you heard me." "I heard you, but whatever you hear tonight, whatever you hear in any voice, you do not answer it, and you don't open that door. It'll try. It knows everyone's voice. It'll use mine. If you hear my voice again tonight, after, it is not." His voice broke in half on the next word, and he began to cry, 5 feet away from us in the dark. "It isn't me. You understand? It is not me. You tell your dad." And the skittering rushed. It came in one long burst from the left, so fast, it made everything I'd heard up to then seem slow. And it crossed the whole campsite, and it hit the back wall of our tent, the far wall opposite the door behind our heads, hard enough that the poles bowed in and cracked back, and the whole tent lurched. A stake ripped somewhere, and Aaron and I ended up in the middle of the floor holding on to each other like little kids. My uncle's voice, one last time from further away than it had been, said 5 words with a space between each one. "Do not leave that tent." Then there was nothing. I mean nothing. No steps going away or steps at all, no skittering or struggle or voices. Even the fire sounds quit after a while, probably burned itself out with nobody feeding it. The woods went to that dead quiet that Nick had spoken of in his story, the kind that doesn't start back up. Aaron and I stayed still in the middle of that tent floor, gripping each other's arms. We didn't say one word for the remainder of the night. for hours. I'd hear him breathe. He was hearing me breathe. Every so often one of us would flinch at nothing, and the other one would grip harder. That was all we could do until the walls of the tent began to grow brighter. Then twice in those hours something walked the perimeter of the site, slow and on 2 feet, with a stride I knew as well as my own mother's footsteps, and neither of us moved. I bit my own hand, and that thing never spoke. Eventually it wasn't there anymore. When the tent wall was fully gold, backed by actual sunlight, the birds came back. I crawled to the door and put my hand on the zipper, about to pull, but I looked back at Aaron. He nodded, and so I pulled it down. It opened with one smooth pull. I looked outside. The campsite was empty. The firing had gone cold and was full of white ash. Way more ash than a normal night. He must have burned half our wood. Nick's tent stood over there with the door shut. The coffee pot was on the table. I saw his camp chair by the fire, with his jacket over the back of it. That jacket is what got me moving. It was cold that morning, and he loved that jacket. I went to his tent calling his name, unzipping it, but it was empty. The sleeping bag was flat and smooth. Never slept in. I found the keys in the side pocket right where he said. Aaron and I lost it for a while. The two of us were screaming the same man's name, running around the trail spurs. We checked the lake shore, went back to camp, out again. Aaron kept the whistle rule, God help him, and stood in the middle of the camp, blowing 3 blasts on the orange whistle from Nick's jacket pocket. He did it over and over. 3, then wait, 3, then wait, and the sound of that whistle going out into those trees and coming back with nothing is a sound I'll never get out of my head. Aaron kept it organized, being 18 and suddenly horribly the only adult. We needed to get to the truck and grab the phone. We packed nothing, taking the keys and the whistle, and started up the trail moving fast, calling Nick's name every minute or so. We were about 2/3 of the way to the trailhead when I saw him. There he was off the trail, downhill, openly standing in the hardwoods. But he was completely naked, no boots even, in the middle of the woods in the cold, arms down at his sides. It reminded me of how he had been staring at the sky, but now he wasn't staring up. His head was level, staring straight ahead, and his skin was so pale. All the color had drained from him. The man was absolutely still. I've never seen anyone living that still. Was he even breathing? He was. Breathing so shallowly, I had to watch his chest for several seconds to finally see something. We ran down to him. We said everything to him, his name, our names. We told him it was us, and that it was daytime, that we had to leave. We even told him it was safe now, which we really had no business saying, because we had no idea what was going on, or if it was really safe. His eyes never once moved to us. Aaron took his own jacket off and put it around Nick's shoulders. Nick didn't help it happen, but didn't stop it either. When Aaron took his arm and said, "Come on, we're going to the truck," and pulled gently, nothing happened. My Uncle Nick did not move an inch. When I tried with his other arm, it was like trying to pull a parking meter. 160 pounds of my uncle was rooted to the ground in a stand of hardwoods, wearing my brother's jacket on his shoulders, eyes wide open. And the last thing we tried, I'm the one who tried it, was I got right in front of his face, an inch away, both hands on his face, and I said to him, "Uncle Nick, it's Danny. It's Danny, and you're okay. It's Danny." Nothing came to his eyes, but down one side of his face, while I held it, there came one tear. Just the one. I've always wondered if it was just the cold making his eyes run, but I could never be sure. We left him there. It was the only call to make, but never in my life has it felt like the right thing to do. Aaron said we had to do it. There was no moving this man. We couldn't carry him half a mile uphill ourselves. We had to get to the truck. We had to call someone. Then we could come right back with help, and he was right. So we ran. We got to the truck, unlocked it, and there was the satellite phone in the console. That ancient brick of a thing Nick had kept in every vehicle he'd owned since before I could remember. And it had a charge. It worked. Aaron's hands were shaking so bad that I had to dial. Search and rescue came. Deputies, too. My dad drove a 3-hour drive and only 2. They found Nick exactly where we had left him, and how we had left him, standing there. It took 4 grown men to get him onto a litter, and not because he was fighting, but because he wasn't helping at all. The man stayed rigid, and they carried my uncle out of the woods like a statue. I watched it happen from the trailhead. My dad stood next to me, watching his little brother come up the hill on a stretcher with his eyes wide open. My dad made a sound I'd never heard him make. 1 syllable, and he put his hand on top of my head like I was a 5-year-old. The hospital kept him for 1 day, just 1. And you're not gonna like the reason any more than I ever did. There was nothing wrong with him. Nothing at all that they could find, not a mark on his body. He should have had some damage from the weather. He had apparently stood barefoot in 40-degree woods for most of a night, but his blood work was normal, all the scans too, and there wasn't a drug found in his body. By that afternoon, he was, in their words, responsive. He would look at you when you talked. He would nod or shake his head. He drank water when it was put in his hand. But he never spoke a word, not to the doctors or to my dad. When they asked him if he understood where he was, he nodded. And when they asked if anything had happened to him out there, he looked at my dad. Then he looked out the window. He was discharged the next morning into my dad's care. My dad took him home to his house, got him set up in his recliner with the TV on. Nick squeezed his hand, which everybody took for a good sign, and my dad ran out for groceries and to grab a change of clothes from our house. My dad was only gone about an hour and a half. When my dad got back, my uncle had gotten his revolver from wherever he had kept it. He was gone. He lay lifelessly in the recliner with the TV still on. I was 15. They didn't let me hear the details of the incident for years, and the details when I finally got them were only these. It was quick, and he had done it in the hour and a half that my dad was gone. It was clear he had been waiting to be alone the whole time, like it was the last chore he had to do. Uncle Nick didn't even leave a note. That tortured my dad for years. My dad did not have closure. But I did. Because Uncle Nick had left a note, days early, spoken out loud to the only 2 people it was really addressed to. Those warnings he had spoken through a tint wall. When he told us he had messed up a long time ago and apologized repeatedly. He told me to tell my dad, but he never got to the end of the last sentence. What was I supposed to tell my dad? Ever since then, I've been trying to figure it out. What do I tell him? Nobody even knew what happened to Nick. The sane reading was that my uncle was sick. Nobody knew it, nobody caught it. The weight loss was a symptom, and the apologies were symptoms. And that voice at the tent was a breakdown. 2 terrified boys dreamed the rest into the gaps. But none of that explains the face we saw on the first trip. Back when I was 10 and he was so very happy and healthy. No problems then. And that certainly was not an owl. And it doesn't explain the mile of footsteps behind me while my uncle crouched at a fire ring ahead of us. We decided to tell our dad everything that same week. The tent and the voices and everything. He listened to our stories without one interruption. Then he said simply, "I believe you." Maybe he did. Maybe he knew that's what he needed to say so that his sons could get through this. Either way, that first year when I couldn't sleep, he'd sit up with me at the kitchen table, telling stories about Nick till it got light out. But still, Nick's last sentence was never finished. Tell your dad. For years I assumed the missing end of it was an apology. Tell your dad I'm sorry. And I let it be that. But it bothered me as I got older, because the more I replayed that night in my head, the more I heard how he was talking. He wasn't rambling. He had been going through a list of things, where his keys were in the side pocket, get the phone, don't answer the voice, don't open the tent. Every item on the list was there because we would need it. And then he said, tell your dad. So that had to be part of the checklist as well. But how? So in my 20s, I began to ask questions. But I had to be careful. My dad didn't talk about Nick easily in those years. I'd get him going on the good stuff, the two of them as kids, then steer around the edges of the conversation. Like what Nick was like at 19 or 20. Did he always camp alone back then? My dad answered what I asked and nothing more. And this little dance went on for a long time. I was fishing for the right answer, but he would just let me fish. That is until one night in Dad's kitchen. Both of us were up late. My kids were sleeping in the guest room, and he set his cup down and said to me, "You always keep circling something. Just go ahead. Ask it." I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. Did anything ever happen to Uncle Nick when he was 19? Camping alone, I mean. "You mean the time he got lost?" he said. He began to repeat the same story that Nick had told us, except from the outside, from Dad's perspective. He told us about the sheriff calling the house and my grandpa driving through the night. Nick's car was found sitting at a trailhead for 3 days with a notice on it under the wiper. Some search and rescue folks were about to go in after him when he came walking out on his own, at a dead sprint. That was already different from Nick's story. He said he came out, found a ticket, and drove away. Then my dad told me another part. He wasn't right after that. A couple of weeks went by and he still wouldn't talk about it. He hardly talked at all, really. One morning I got up about 4 for my shift, and he was standing out in the backyard. The image of Nick in those woods standing there still popped into my mind. I knew what he was about to say. Yeah, he was just standing facing the trees. I went out there wondering if he was sleepwalking, but he wasn't. His eyes were open. So I asked him, "What in the world are you doing out here?" Well, he looks right at me and he said, "It knows where I live now." He said I should not have said yes. I never knew what that meant. I was so taken aback by what he had just told me. I was 25 years old, had a new baby and a shift starting at 5. I told him he'd had a bad scare and a bad dream, and I told him he had to quit camping alone. I took him inside then and made some coffee. By the next time it came up, he was laughing about the whole thing. Lost track of time, he said, with a laugh. And it was good, really good to see him laugh like that. And I was so proud of myself, like I was the one that helped him get over it. But I think I was just the one that helped him hide it. I was a selfish idiot. I just wanted things to be normal again. My dad sat there staring at the table. Then I asked my next question. You remember all those years he wanted to take us camping with him, right? And you would say he had to wait till we're older. Wait till Danny's 10. I always thought it was just dad stuff, but was it just dad stuff? He mashed his fingers together, still staring at the table, and laid his chin on top of them. Without looking at me, he asked, "Why do you think I kept telling him no?" If you'd asked me back then, I'd have told you car wrecks or drowning. The stuff you call normal dad stuff, but that wasn't it. Every time he asked, and he asked for years, my little brother, best man I ever knew, asking to take my boys camping. Well, something in my gut sat up and said, not yet. I couldn't have told you why. I never put it together with me finding him out in the yard. Not once. I just kept saying not yet, and I did that for years. And then you stopped? Then I stopped. It had been so long. He was my Nick. You had turned 10. There was nothing to point at, and you can't run a family on a feeling. Turns out, you can't run one without it, either. He paused, and I took that moment to relay to him Nick's final message to us. And I asked him directly, what did that message mean? Why did he tell us, tell your dad? I don't think he was apologizing, Dad said. He was sending it home. I'm the only person alive who was there for the start of it. He knew I'd remember that moment in the yard. He told me the truth one time in his whole life standing in my backyard at 4 a.m, and I talked him out of it. So I think I got my answer from my dad, and it revealed to me the weight that my dad had been carrying. I soon found out that Aaron was carrying a weight too, but differently. Aaron was never the type of guy to talk about his feelings. And for a long time after this, I mistook that for him coping. He finished school and married a girl. He had his boys, and somewhere in there he got into backpacking. That's how I heard about it, through the grapevine. Aaron's real into backpacking now, someone said. Ultralight gear and long solo trips. When I heard that, I thought, honestly, good. The woods were where we had Nick. I still camped too. Then a few years ago, his wife called me. She asked me to talk to him. She's worried that I need to check the garage. That weekend I drove up to his place. In Aaron's garage, on the wall over his workbench, was a map of the national forest. The whole forest, the real topographic sheets, taped together 6 feet wide. It was divided into numbered sections in his handwriting, and most of the sections were shaded in pencil. Each shaded one had little dates in the corner going back years. There was a shelf of labeled SD cards from trail cameras, a logbook even. My brother had been walking a grid through the forest alone, a section or two at a time, for nearly 10 years now, and the family called it backpacking. We had it out right there in the garage when he found me. We couldn't do it in the house. His boys were in there. I was not calm during this. I said outright what I felt, that he was going to end up like Nick, and I wanted that to sting. And I'm pretty sure it did. He said to me, I can't just go on not knowing what happened to him. You can, I'm sure you can. And I don't mean that to be mean, Danny. I'm glad you can move on. I mean that. But I can't. Aaron, come on, man. We know what happened to him. No, we don't. We know how it ended. We don't know why it ended. Those aren't the same things. All right then, Aaron. Tell me you haven't been wasting your time then. After all of this, I gestured to his project on the walls. Have you found anything? Are you able now to explain what he went through and why? Honestly, I was bluffing, trying to get a rise out of him, trying to prove a point that he was wasting his time and he should stop with this. But then he said to me, one time, a few years back, at Section 11, he pointed. I was packing out at dusk. I was behind schedule. About 100 yards off in the timber, something said my name, Danny. Aaron looked right at my face as he talked. It was in his voice, and it said my name in his voice twice. And here's what I need you to hear. I know the rule. I've known the rule since I was 13. But that voice sounded so happy to see me. I swallowed hard, scared of what he was about to say. But he shook his head, and he closed his eyes. No, I didn't say anything to it. I did exactly as Nick had taught us. I kept my mouth shut, and I walked to the truck, and didn't even run. He looked at the map. But I stood there first, Dan. I stood there and thought about it. It was his voice. It had been 8 years since I heard my Uncle Nick, and some part of me was standing in that timber thinking, what if it's not all it? What if some piece of Uncle Nick was in there? He stood with us our whole lives, for the short time we really had him. But there I was, hearing his voice, turning around and driving home like a coward, driving home to a warm supper. He wiped his eyes, which had gone wet. I'm sorry, Danny. The grid stays up. Somebody has to keep looking. But don't worry about me. I'm not going to make the same mistake. So we made a deal in that garage. Instead of making peace, we made a deal. He keeps to the rules, as he promised. All of them. And he doesn't stay till after dark. And I asked if he could call me from the trailhead every time he goes in, and every time he comes out. And you know what? He's never missed a call in all the years since, and I finally have peace of mind. But I'll be honest with you. I'm so scared of the day he'll come back, and something will be wrong. And I'm gonna go out there finding him in the backyard, staring at the woods. What do I do when my brother tells me that something out there now knows where he lives? Yeah, so to be completely honest here, there were parts of this story when I read it and did the dialogue that I started to tear up myself. I try to put myself in the character's shoes when I do some of the dialogue. The bare minimum for narration work, really. But with stories like these, you can go a bit deep. And whether it's true or fictional, I felt for these characters. Rest in peace, Uncle Nick. And stay safe in the woods, everyone. Good night. Thank you all so much for tuning in to this episode of Unexplained Encounters. I am your host, Darkness Prevails. Follow me on X at Dark Prevails. If you're on YouTube, you should be listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Just go on there and search for Unexplained Encounters, and you'll have such a better listening experience. Got a scary story of the unknown? Send it to me at darkstories.org. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one. Creepypasta is the reason I'm really here. Darkness Prevails or EerieCast would not be here without the good and the bad creepypasta from the old days. The Rake, Mr. Widemouth, even Jeff the Killer. My love for horror and writing blossomed like a corpse flower back in those days. And one of my most popular videos is actually a collection of my own writings. So today, I'm excited to share with you a terrifying new creepypasta from my depraved mind. It's a change from the typical allegedly true stuff, so I do hope you are at least entertained. This is titled Doghead, and it is not for the faint of heart. The smell still clung to me. That was the worst part. The stench of burning fur and rotted wood followed me down the dark corridors of my dreams, where Doghead floats in a haze of embers. Even now, with the memory spread out like an oil slick across my brain, I can't sleep without tasting ash in the back of my throat. This thing that latched onto me, onto us, has a breath all its own. Every time I close my eyes, I see the plaque's warped edges smoldering in the barrel, and in those half-dream states, I feel something behind me, pressing close, its breath a wet rasp. We'd been on the road for days. I was the one who needed it, the spontaneous cross-country exorcism of heartbreak. Bryce liked to pretend he was along for the ride, just to keep me sane. But I caught the occasional flicker in his eyes that said he was having fun. He was the only one who could coax a real laugh out of me after my ex-husband's betrayal. And then there was his smile. God, that smile. It had a warmth to it that always eased the knot in my chest, even if I pretended otherwise. He wasn't classically handsome, not in a magazine cover way, but there was an easy charm in the way his brown hair curled around his ears, and the freckles just beneath his eyes made him look perpetually amused with the world. Sometimes I'd catch myself noticing how broad his shoulders were, or how he carried himself like he was ready to shield me from anything. Then I'd push those thoughts away, refusing to label them attraction. We took turns driving, splitting gas and cheap motel fees. The miles blurred, stretches of farmland, the occasional billboard proclaiming something about the Lord's righteous vengeance, the ever-present hum of rubber on asphalt. Bryce tried to keep my spirits high with a running commentary on every bizarre roadside attraction we passed. "There," he said, tapping the window as we rumbled down a lonely Nebraska highway. "See that sign with the woman in the clown wig? Or maybe it's just a sun-bleached scarecrow." "Could be a haunted scarecrow," I said. "Maybe we should turn back and pick it up for you. Another treasure to hoard." He grinned, that warming smile of his, and my own lips twitched upward despite my mood. "I only collect the best oddities, remember?" It was our joke. Bryce had a weird menagerie in his apartment. Souvenirs from yard sales and secondhand shops. A porcelain doll missing half its face, a plaster Virgin Mary turned into a lamp, a goat skull someone had fashioned into a coffee mug. Disturbing stuff, but he found them charming. He was one of the few people who could use a term like sun-bleached scarecrow and somehow have it come out sounding charming. You'd fill your trunk with any piece of trash that calls your name. My elbow found his side. "Be grateful I'm here to keep you from going bankrupt." He just gave me a wry smile. "You only pretend to be my keeper, Alice." I rolled my eyes. The truth was, I liked that he let me have control sometimes. It gave me a sense of peace, something I hadn't had in a long while. My ex, Brandon, had mastered the art of false democracy, nodding along to my ideas before doing whatever the hell he wanted anyway. The day I found our savings account gutted felt like swallowing broken glass. All those careful years of saving gone in a series of secret withdrawals that read like a receipt of betrayal. A receipt with the gall to ask for a tip. My stomach twisted at the memory, so I pressed my forehead against the cool window, letting the endless cornfields blur into nothing. A battered billboard caught our attention. The words, "Wolf's Curiosities," had nearly peeled off with age, and the sign pointed down a narrow, muddy track that disappeared into tall grass. Some local version of a curiosity shop, probably. Bryce's eyes lit up at once. "Come on," he said. "Let's see if they've got something truly strange for me to lug around." I exhaled. I guess we could stretch our legs. An attempt at a grumble was quickly supplanted with a grin. The highway's center line had started to blur. He turned the car onto the track, which led to a rickety shack balanced precariously on a slight rise. The sign outside was an exact match to the billboard's sun-bleached letters. Wolf's Curiosities. The building looked ready to collapse. Rotting beams, a sagging porch. A large bell hung above the door, caked in rust. "Are we sure it's open?" I peered through the darkened windows. Bryce shrugged, still wearing that grin. "Only one way to find out." The way his mouth curved upward. Sometimes I wondered if he knew how much it disarmed me. We got out of the car, and immediately the wind whipped up dust and something vaguely chemical-smelling, like cheap perfume gone rancid. As we stepped onto the porch, one of the boards creaked so loudly I thought it would snap. Bryce tested the door. To my surprise, it opened with a dull clang of a bell, still functional despite the rust. Watching him enter was the equivalent of a child stepping into an amusement park. He lived for the hunt of oddities, for the quest to find that next eerie conversation piece. I suppose it was one of the things I found appealing about him, even if I didn't experience the same joy he did over the items he collected. Inside, the smell changed, a swirl of perfume, dust, and a faint whiff of decay. The cramped space was cluttered with old dolls and chipped porcelain statues, worn knickknacks and battered furniture. Bits of everything and nothing. A mirror near the entrance had a gold frame, peeling in large flakes. I caught my own reflection. There were dark circles under my eyes that were once bright. My hair needed a trim, and I seemed leaner than last I looked. I turned away. Bryce was already poking through the shelves. "Oh, look at this!" He lifted a tarnished, wind-up monkey with symbols for hands. One of its glass eyes was missing. "I'm in love." "You have a warped definition of love, you know that?" I nudged the broken monkey with a finger. "Let's see if there's a proprietor around before you steal that thing." That was when I saw the dog's head. It hung on the far wall, a taxidermy mount on a shield-shaped wooden plaque. The fur was the color of old rust, mottled in places with bare patches of darker hide. The muzzle was slightly parted, as if panting. At first, I thought the eyes were made of cheap glass, but when I stepped closer, I realized they looked wet, reflective in a way that made my stomach clench. An odd static skittered up the base of my neck. I let my gaze wander over the details. Those stiff whiskers, the tip of one ear chipped away to reveal something pale beneath. Had the ear been broken, or was it just worn out with time? The longer I looked, the more my stomach soured. "Alice!" I jumped at Bryce's sudden near whisper. "I'm not the only one seeing that, right?" He stepped beside me. I noticed his shoulders were tense. "It's wrong," I said quietly. "Something about it." For a heartbeat, I almost expected it to blink. A moment later, we heard shuffling footsteps from the back, and an older man emerged. He wore suspenders and a stained shirt, carrying a box of dusty trinkets. His narrow face was deeply lined, hair slicked to one side in a stringy mass. He paused when he saw us, then gave a small, stiff nod. "Afternoon," Bryce said politely, though it was probably creeping into late evening by now. The man said nothing, setting his box down on a warped desk, then slowly made his way to us. The thick smell of aged cologne followed. "You folks tourists?" he said in a raspy voice. "Something like that," Bryce replied. "We saw your sign off the highway. You've got quite a collection. Really interesting pieces." His voice was warm again. It suddenly felt easier to breathe. The man's gaze flicked to me. lingered for an uncomfortable moment, then settled on the dog's head behind us. He cleared his throat. "That's the proudest piece in here." I shivered. "Why a dog's head?" He shrugged. "Sometimes you get hold of an artifact that chooses you, not the other way around." His lips twitched, almost a smile but not quite. "Came into my possession under unusual circumstances." Bryce peered up at the plaque. "What kind of dog was it?" The man exhaled, fiddling with the loose thread on his sleeve. "Hard to say. A stray, maybe a crossbreed." Then he leaned forward. "You know, I could part with it. Been meaning to let it go." "How much?" Bryce asked, half joking. He often haggled for his bizarre finds, but I could tell something about this made him genuinely curious. $30, said the man, almost too quickly. "That's a bargain," Bryce joked, glancing my way. "Should we?" "No," I said, the word abrupt. It slipped out before I realized how curt I sounded. "I mean, that's not exactly a decoration I want to stare at in the back seat for hours." But Bryce was intrigued. I could see the gears turning, the collector in him practically salivating. "It's definitely weird," he said, "and possibly haunted." "Hush," the shopkeeper muttered, then more quietly. "Careful who you bring into your home. Not everything's friendly." He refused to elaborate when Bryce pressed him for details. I wanted to know why he said who you bring into your home. But I stepped away. Bryce followed me with that sheepish, warming smile that usually made me forget whatever I was mad about. "Come on, it's $30. Worst case, we regret it and throw it away. But I know that you know you'd regret not snagging it for me more." "That's a straw man argument," I said, almost smiling despite a deep unease in my belly. The eyes on that dog looked too aware. "Bryce, I just don't like it." His expression softened. "I won't force it. But if it's okay, maybe we just keep it for a while. See if it's worth anything. You know I love messed up conversation pieces. If it's too creepy, I'll handle it. I promise." I caved. Why? Part of me wondered if it was just to avoid a fight, or maybe because I sensed how important it was for him to keep me distracted. And maybe, deep down, I wanted to take something equally broken out of that shop. Something that mirrored how I felt. That anger, betrayal, dread. It was nonsense, but that's where my head was. So, Bryce paid the man. We carried the plaque off the wall and placed it carefully into the trunk, wrapping it in some old towels to keep it from rolling around. When I glanced at the mount one last time before shutting the lid, I noticed that the dog's eyes almost seemed to reflect my face, as if they wanted me to see myself in them. I closed the trunk quickly. The shopkeeper, pockets stuffed with the crumpled bills Bryce had handed him, mumbled something like, "Don't say I didn't warn you." He turned on his heel and went to the back. By the time we reached the door, he was gone, leaving us to find our way out. The musty shop felt colder than when we'd first arrived. Outside, the wind was picking up, blowing in dark clouds. The sun was shrinking as well, turning the horizon into a bruise of purple and orange. We climbed into the car and shut the doors in silence. Bryce started the engine, offered me a small, uncertain grin. "A score?" I didn't reply, just stared at the shack in the side mirror until it vanished behind a bend in the track. We drove on, dusk creeping across the sky. I sensed Bryce was holding back questions, so I broke the tension. "Hey, do you remember that time, what was it, sophomore year? When you showed up at my door in the middle of the night because you'd fought with your parents?" He glanced over, then returned his eyes to the road. Yeah, I was so mad I thought I was going to run away forever. But I ended up walking 6 blocks and realized I didn't have enough money for a bus. Or a plan. I smirked, though my heart squeezed a little at the memory. You told me you were fleeing tyranny or something dramatic like that. He grinned, his entire face brightening in that familiar way. It felt that way at the time. And you in your pajamas let me crash on your couch, remember? I remember my mom freaking out because there was a random teenage boy in the living room the next morning. Bryce laughed softly, the tension in the car loosening a bit. She was pretty pissed, but she never told my parents. I appreciated that. That's because she always thought of you as a weirdly responsible teenage boy. Joke's on her, I guess. Hey, he said, mock offended. I'm still fairly responsible. I flicked my gaze to the back seats, which, if nearly folded down, would reveal Doghead's plaque, wrapped in towels. Sure you are. He shook his head and snorted. You're one to talk, Miss Cross-Country Trip to escape my crap life. Despite myself, I laughed. It was a small moment, a reminder that we had years of shared memories. Some silly, some heartfelt. For a few precious seconds, I forgot about the dog's head in the trunk and the unsettled anger that gnawed at me. Bryce tried to lighten the mood further as we approached the nearest motel. He cracked jokes about how we were the dumb teens in a horror movie, the ones who pick up a cursed artifact and die first. I forced a laugh, my voice tight. I think he sensed it. He changed the subject to my ex, though he didn't say his name, then asked, You sure you're holding up okay? You've been quieter than usual. I drummed my fingers on the armrest. I'm just tired. It's been a lot these past few months. Moving out, getting lawyers, dividing up stuff, and now, apparently, babysitting a severed dog's head. He grimaced at that. Hey, look, if it makes you feel weird, we can toss it. I mean it. I shook my head. No, it's fine. I paused, then admitted, I don't want to ruin your fun. The confession sounded more fragile than I intended. He glanced at me, concern etched into his face. I quickly turned away, changing the subject. How far to the motel? Just a few minutes. Don't worry, I saw a sign for a place. Hilltop Motor Lodge. Probably as classy as it sounds. He tried to return to that easy banter. Bet they'll have bed bugs, or maybe a stolen painting in every room. You never know with these side-of-the-highway specials. I pressed my lips together. So your idea is to gather cursed objects and bed bugs in one epic road trip. Great. He chuckled. A road trip to remember. Can't deny that. We soon pulled into the lot of Hilltop Motor Lodge. The neon sign flickered, the letters partly burned out. The parking lot was pitted with potholes. An office near the entrance sported a crooked metal door and drawn blinds. We stepped inside to check in. The receptionist, a bored-looking woman in her 60s, barely glanced up. She gave us a single key with a chipped plastic fob. We grabbed our overnight bags from the trunk. We left the dog's head where it was, though I felt like those dead, glossy eyes were somehow staring at me through its covering. The room had 2 beds, separated by a warped nightstand. The curtains smelled like old cigarette smoke. There were dark stains on the carpet that I dared not identify. I plopped my bag down and tested the bed with my hand. It sank about 6 inches, accompanied by an unsettling squeak. Bryce clicked on a lamp that buzzed, flickering with an anemic glow. Our road trips always included lodgings like this, but tonight it felt particularly suffocating. Bryce was rummaging in the mini-fridge. Nice! We've got half a can of beer and an ancient burrito. No brand name either, just a greasy wrapper with a clown face on it. Yum. I scrunched my nose. Hard pass. I'm actually going to get a shower. try to rinse off the day. He pointed at the door to our bathroom. "Don't let the ghosts in the drain get you." I mustered a small snort of amusement and headed in. The overhead light in the bathroom was harsh and flickered once before stabilizing. The mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized, tired, hollow around the eyes. The hush of the water was strangely soothing at first, but within minutes, the bathroom's ventilation kicked on with a sputtering drone, rattling as if it were about to break. Part of me was afraid to open the shower curtain, for reasons I couldn't define. The dog's eyes were in my mind, that same intangible presence. "Don't be stupid," I muttered. I took my shower, then forced myself to shut off the water, step out, and face my reflection again. I dried off and changed into loose sweatpants and a t-shirt, steeling myself. Opening the bathroom door, I kind of expected to see the dog's mount perched on the bed, but there was only Bryce, lying back on his mattress, eyes on his phone. He glanced up. "All yours," I said. He nodded and got up, passing me to use the bathroom next. I watched him close the door, then exhaled. My heart was racing for no good reason. I slipped under the covers and stared at the swirling pattern of the old wallpaper. Eventually, Bryce turned off the light. The darkness settled in, broken by a sickly glow from the neon sign outside. The shadows danced across the walls. I tried to let my mind drift, but sleep came only in tenuous increments, each dream laced with flickers of panic. I'd see a corridor with peeling wallpaper, hear panting echoing through the emptiness, feel something's breath at my ear. I snapped awake at one point, heart pounding. The room felt colder than before. My gaze darted to the dresser in the corner, on which I'd left my phone to charge. I saw the silhouette of Doghead's plaque. Then I realized that wasn't possible. Doghead was in the car, not in the room. My eyes adjusted, and I saw it was just the lamp, and a distorted shadow from a coat we'd thrown on a chair. I pressed a hand to my thudding chest. In the quiet, I could have sworn I heard the sound of someone breathing near the dresser. Slow, pained. I rubbed my eyes. Then I glanced over at Bryce. He was a big lump under the blankets, unmoving. That breathing continued, soft as a whisper, but too steady to be my imagination. The neon sign outside flickered, lighting up the corner just enough to see there was nothing there. That didn't stop me from inching out of bed and shuffling toward Bryce's side. I reached out, about to wake him, but I hesitated. Was I really about to say I heard a ghost dog panting? He'd laugh gently, but still. Or he'd give me that concerned look, that one that said he worried I was unraveling. I didn't want that pity. I was strong, or at least I wanted to be. I returned to my bed, got under the covers, and stared at the ceiling. Eventually, I must have drifted off, because I don't remember the rest of the night. Morning found me exhausted, my eyes gritty and my mind frazzled. When Bryce woke, he gave me a cautious smile. "Rough night?" You could say that." I scrubbed my face with my hands. "Did you hear anything weird?" He cocked his head. "Define weird." I opened my mouth to tell him, but it didn't come out. "Never mind," I said. "Just nightmares." He nodded sympathetically, and we didn't discuss it further. Maybe we should have. Late afternoon found us on an empty stretch of farmland, golden fields and scrubby patches of cornstalks, half dead over a glowering sky. The old Toyota started acting up, sputtering and jerking. Bryce cursed under his breath, pulling over to the dusty shoulder. He cut the engine. The car refused to start again. "This can't be happening," I said, fiddling anxiously with my phone. No signal either. Bryce tried calling for roadside assistance anyway. To our relief, the call went through, though it sounded staticky. A mechanic from the next town over said he'd come as soon as he could. So we waited in the lingering afternoon heat. The wind stirred the cornstalks, making them rattle like old bones. I stared out at the horizon, feeling smaller by the minute. Something about the fields rolling away into the distance unsettled me. Once or twice I found myself glancing to the trunk, where the dog's head was half covered with towels still. Why had we bought that thing? "We might be here a while," Bryce said. He tilted his seat back. "Want to, poke around? That farmhouse?" He pointed down the road, where a battered mailbox stood listing to one side, and behind it rose the silhouette of a farmhouse that had clearly seen better days. Could be something interesting. "You want to explore a random abandoned farm?" He shrugged, tried a grin. "Gotta pass the time somehow. It's a sign, really. The universe decided we needed a horror movie adventure." I glared at him, but a tiny part of me appreciated the attempt to lighten the situation. "Fine, but if we get chased off by some shotgun-wielding farmer, I'm blaming you." He popped the trunk to grab flashlights. Before we left, I faced him and said, "Bryce?" "Yeah?" I studied his expression, the genuine concern in his eyes, the reassuring set of his mouth. "You always used to talk about traveling around the country, seeing it all. Back in high school, we'd dream of that, remember?" His smile broadened, that same warm curve that made my heart do a little twist. "We did, although I never thought it would be under these circumstances. Never pictured you having to, run from my past." I stared at the fields. "It's not exactly how I envisioned it either." He touched my shoulder gently. "We'll figure it out, Alice. Maybe in a weird way. This trip, cursed dog's head notwithstanding, will help you see that there's more to life than Brandon's screw-ups." My throat tightened. I wasn't sure if I was grateful or embarrassed. "Yeah," I whispered. He paused, then patted my arm. "Now, let's go not get murdered in a creepy farmhouse." I exhaled a shaky laugh, and we left the car where it was. The farmhouse was in worse condition up close. The front porch sagged in the middle, and the windows were boarded up. The paint had peeled so thoroughly, the wood looked flayed. An old, twisted tree stood in the yard, its limbs bare of leaves. Wind rustled through the grass, and the evening light made everything seem slightly surreal. "Creepy enough?" Bryce asked, flashing me that signature smile again, as if that alone could banish any lurking shadows. He was wearing that same look I'd seen on him yesterday when we stepped into that shop, right before he purchased Dog's Head for $30. I gave him a mock salute. "Lead the way, Captain Curiosity." He gingerly tested the steps. They groaned but held. The door was partially ajar, so we slipped inside. The stench of mold hit like a slap. Something else too, a faint odor of animal musk. Light filtered through cracks in the boarded windows, illuminating swirls of dust motes. The remains of furniture, an overturned couch, a battered table, were all scattered in the front room. Sections of the wallpaper had rotted off the walls. "You happy, you maniac?" I whispered, although there was no real need to whisper. "This place could collapse on us." Bryce just walked slowly, shining his flashlight even though there was enough weak daylight to see. "I always wanted to explore a haunted house." "You and your taste in weird," I muttered. We reached a narrow hallway. The floor felt spongy in places. At the end was a door that gaped open to reveal rickety stairs leading down. A dank odor rose from the darkness, intensifying the smell of mold. My nose wrinkled. "You're not going to," I began. "Yep," he said, stepping onto the top stair. The board squeaked ominously. I sighed, following close behind, not wanting to wait alone. The steps descended into a small basement with a low ceiling. Wet patches stained the walls. It was even colder down here, the chill sinking into my bones. Bryce's flashlight cut a narrow beam through the dark. In one corner, I saw a broken cabinet, its contents spilled onto the floor. In another, a dusty workbench. But what dominated the far wall was this rusted metal bracket, shaped like a shield or crest, bolted to the concrete. A ring of dark stains, was it mold? Spread around it. Bryce stepped closer, shining the beam at it. I felt my skin crawl. The shape of that bracket, the curve of its top and edges, it looked exactly like the back of that dog's plaque, as if it had once been mounted here. "That's weird," he said softly, crouching to examine it. "It's like a cradle for something. It fits the dog's head plaque, doesn't it?" A cold wave washed over me. There was no question, no guesswork. It was a perfect match. I took an involuntary step back. My flashlight flickered, and that damp dog breath smell intensified, as if the basement was breathing. "Do you smell that?" I whispered. Bryce's brow furrowed. He opened his mouth to reply, but the flashlight in his hand blinked out. We both froze. My chest tightened. All at once, I heard a faint scraping from somewhere behind us, like claws on concrete. I swung my flashlight wildly, illuminating only drab walls and lumps of debris. "Let's go," I hissed. "Yeah," Bryce agreed, voice taut. He fiddled with his flashlight, and it came back on with a flicker. We hurried back up the stairs. On the main floor, the wind outside rattled the broken windows, making me jump. We marched straight to the door and out onto the porch, my heart raking against my ribcage. I didn't look back. When we made it to the yard, Bryce's phone buzzed, startling us both. The mechanic. He'd be there soon. I shot the house one final glance. The porch seemed to slump, as though it was releasing a long-held breath. For a moment, I was worried we'd left footprints in the dust, some evidence that might provoke something. Then I shook the thought out of my head. We made our way back to the car. When we got there, Bryce unlocked the trunk and peeked in at his newest purchase, as if to make sure it was still there. I couldn't resist a peek too. I saw the dog's head had shifted beneath the towels, exposing half its muzzle. I could see the curve of its lips, parted as if ready to snarl or pant. Something about it felt smug, like it had known all along what we'd find in that basement. We ended up in a tiny rental house next to a cornfield while the mechanic worked on the car. Apparently, he needed a few days to get the right parts. His cousin offered the place for cheap, less than the motel, the man promised, and we were in no position to argue. The house was small, only a few rooms. It had electricity, running water, the basics. Old scuffs on the walls and floors hinted it had seen better times. Not the sort of place I'd choose for a vacation, but it would do. We put our bags in the living room, setting up makeshift sleeping arrangements. Bryce took the couch. I took a fold-out cot we'd found in a closet. My knees still ached. For a moment, I had stumbled in the farmhouse basement, and I could still feel it. The tension coiled inside me like a knot. Bryce got beers from a gas station down the road, trying to raise our morale. But as evening set in, I could see he was distracted, his gaze drifting toward the car outside. We had left Doghead in the trunk. Because he was having the car being worked on, he wanted to bring the Doghead inside. But one look at my face after that suggestion, well, let's just say he changed his mind and didn't argue. But I noticed him scratching at his neck periodically, as though something irritated him. Around 9, I looked up from my phone to see him staring out the window. The last streaks of purple twilight were fading. I caught a glimpse of his reflection in the glass, wide-eyed, lips parted. "Bryce?" I said quietly. "You okay?" He turned, blinking as if he'd forgotten I was there. "Yeah, sure. Just thinking." "About the plaque?" He gave a wry chuckle. "A bit, and other stuff, like what the bracket in that basement meant. Why did it look so familiar? You can't tell me we managed to break down right where Doghead had been mounted before?" I finished for him. We shared a chill. "I don't know. Maybe it's in our heads. The creepiness factor of your new favorite oddity is making us paranoid." He frowned. "Maybe I should go back, just to be sure." "Feel free, but I'll probably be the one taking you for a rabies shot if you get mauled by a ghost dog." He half smiled. I mirrored him, but the gesture was empty. The dog breath smell at that farmhouse still lingered in my nostrils. Night fell, thick and silent. Even the crickets were subdued. I tossed and turned on the cot, never fully dozing. Sometime after midnight, I heard faint, creaking floorboards outside the living room. My first thought was, did Bryce go to the bathroom? But the footsteps sounded heavier, dragging in a way. My pulse fluttered. I sat up. The hallway light was off, but the moonlight cast a dull glow through a small window. I could just make out that the couch was empty. Bryce wasn't there. I got up and carefully slipped out to the corridor. The boards were cold beneath my feet. At the far end, I noticed a door. It stood slightly open, though I hadn't explored that part of the house yet. I heard scraping noises. The stench of dog breath, wet, musky, with an undertone of something rancid, clung to the air. I covered my mouth to avoid gagging. I called Bryce's name quietly. No reply. Tremors crawled through my arms and legs as I pushed open the door. It led down into a small cellar, not unlike the farmhouse, but less decrepit. The stairs were wooden, the air thick and stale. I flicked on my phone's flashlight and descended slowly, each step groaning. My heart banged in my chest as a nauseating smell hit me full force. At the bottom, the floor was just packed dirt. Rusted shelves lined the walls, holding old cans of paints or boxes of nails. My light swept across the space until it landed on Bryce, crouched in the far corner. He was holding the dog's head plaque. I had no idea how it had gotten there. He must have gone outside to retrieve it, but why? A soft moan slipped from my mouth as I crept closer. Dark fluid seeped around Bryce's fingers where they gripped the wood, as if the plaque were bleeding. Or maybe it was just some thick, viscous residue. Either way, the sight made my stomach lurch. His eyes were half closed, rolling back. His lips moved in silent murmurs, almost a chant. "Bryce," I whispered, stepping into the muddy floor. My shoes squelched. He didn't respond. I reached for him, felt a sticky warmth coat my fingers as I grabbed the plaque. The stench was unbearable, rot and dog fur, pungent enough to make me gag. I yanked the plaque from his hands, and it came free with a repulsive slurp. He gasped, eyes snapping open. A ragged breath tore from his throat. Alice? What? He clutched his temples as if in pain. I dropped the plaque, letting it clatter to the floor. My flashlight showed a slick smear across its back, too dark to be anything but fresh gore. I tried not to think about it. Are you okay? I knelt, pressing a hand to his cheek. It felt cold. He shook his head, disoriented. I don't remember. I just woke up here. We need to get you out, I said, forcing calm into my voice. Can you stand? He let me help him up. He swayed but managed to stay on his feet. I grabbed the plaque off the floor, though part of me wanted to leave it there. But dread told me that leaving it was a terrible idea for reasons I couldn't define. We staggered up the steps. I slammed the cellar door behind us, fumbled in the dark for the lock, and twisted it. In the hallway, we both leaned against the wall, panting. I flicked on the overhead light. Bryce was pale, sweat beading along his hairline. What the hell just happened? He said in a hoarse whisper. I swallowed. I have no clue. He pressed a shaky hand to his face. I felt like it was calling me, somehow. I was dreaming, maybe I was sleepwalking, I don't know. The next thing I knew, you were there, pulling me out of this fog. That's it, I said, voice trembling. We're burning it. Tonight, right now. He nodded, eyes dark. Yes. We hobbled outside, adrenaline fueling us. The yard was dimly lit by a half moon. The cornfield rustled in the breeze, whispering like 1,000 hushed voices. I felt dizzy, but I refused to slow. We searched for something to start a fire, finally finding a rusty metal barrel behind the shed. It smelled of old oil, but it would serve. We set the plaque inside, Doghead staring up at us with that awful parted muzzle. At that moment, I almost pictured it twisting into a grin that mocked Bryce's usual warm smile, a corruption of everything about him that had made me feel safe. Then we poured lighter fluid over it. Bryce's hands shook as he flicked the lighter. The moment the flame caught, the inside of the barrel lit up with a whoosh. A foul stench rose in a thick plume, burning hair and old rot. I gagged and stepped back. But we stayed there, shoulder to shoulder, until the flames reduced fur to char, the wood cracking and curling under the heat. The dog's features blackened, collapsing in on themselves. At one point, I swore I heard a low whine, but maybe that was just the wind through the barrel's open side. We endured it for as long as it took for the plaque to be consumed, leaving only ashes and some twisted remnants of nails. When it was done, I slumped to the ground. Bryce leaned against the side of the barrel, tears glistening in his eyes from the smoke, or maybe not. We both stared into the embers, breath coming in ragged pulls. Eventually, he placed a lid over the barrel, smothering the last of the flames. I made sure the coals were doused with water from a rusted spigot. We stumbled back into the house, locked the doors, and sat there in the dim living room, not speaking for a long time. When the exhaustion finally overtook me, I fell asleep on the couch, cradled by the fear that maybe it wasn't truly over. Weeks slipped by in a haze. The mechanic fixed our car, we continued the trip, cutting it short and heading home faster than planned. I didn't argue about it. I wanted to get away from Nebraska, away from all of it. Bryce was quieter than usual, but we both pretended things were fine. We'd burned it. It was over. Back home in my cramped apartment, I tried to resume a normal routine. I looked for temp jobs, tried to get my finances in order after the divorce fiasco, even half-heartedly browsed online dating, though the thought made me sick. Sleep came and went in fragments. I'd go to bed exhausted but wake up even more drained. The nightmares persisted, each one bringing me back to that farmhouse basement. I'd see the bracket, the flaking concrete stained with some dark substance. Then the panting would start. My phone rang one night around midnight. I jolted awake, heart thudding. The caller ID read, Bryce. "Hey, Bryce?" I answered groggily, relief washing through me that maybe he couldn't sleep either and just wanted to talk. All I heard was breathing. At first, I thought it was just static on the line, but then I heard the faint wetness of each exhale, like some animal was on the other side. It gave me goosebumps. "Bryce?" I repeated. The breathing didn't stop. Then, abruptly, the call ended. I tried calling him back, but it went straight to voicemail. A swirl of dread took root in my stomach. It had been weeks since we'd burned Doghead, and he'd seemed to be doing better, though we hadn't talked much besides the occasional text. Why would he call me so late, just to breathe into the phone? The same thing happened the next night, and the next, always the same. I'd pick up, hear that rasping breath, then click, the call ended. By the fourth time, my nerves were shredded. I was having trouble functioning during the day. My temper spiked at small inconveniences, like I was carrying this internal blaze of anger. It wasn't just at my ex anymore. Now it was at everything. A barista messed up my coffee order, and I snarled under my breath until the poor woman apologized twice. I even snapped at my neighbor for leaving the hallway door ajar. I could not quell that fury, and beneath it lay anxiety, a helpless terror that something was looming. Finally, I reached out to Bryce's sister, but even she had not heard from him. After that, I called his local police, asking for a wellness check. The officer on the phone was polite but curt. They'd go to see if he was home. An hour later, the officer called back. Bryce's door had been found open, but the place was empty. There was, the officer said, in a carefully neutral tone, a strange odor in the living room. He said it smelled like dead animal. But there was no sign of Bryce. They advised I contact them if I learned anything about his whereabouts. I was too rattled to even cry. My guilt pressed on me like a physical weight. Why hadn't I insisted we'd get rid of that plaque earlier? Or talked to him into seeking help after that night in the cellar? The next day, I called a friend of ours, Quinn, who actually lived near Bryce. He said Bryce had not shown up to work for nearly a week. Something was very wrong. Despite every warning bell in my head, I packed a bag and drove back to that farmhouse. I think some part of me believed if I went there, I'd find a clue, or maybe I just needed to know. The drive stretched out before me like purgatory. My thoughts cycled between dread, anger, and a faint flicker of hope that maybe I'd find him safe. But I remembered the calls and the panting breath, those abrupt cutoffs, and that tiny hope shriveled. I arrived in the early afternoon. The sky was overcast, threatening rain. The farmhouse looked even more dilapidated, as if it had aged years since we'd last stepped through. The boards on the windows flapped in the wind. The porch sagged lower, the front door hanging off a single hinge. Inside, the floors were caked in dust and old mud. My footsteps stirred clouds. I found my way back to the basement stairs, thinking that some supernatural force would appear and stop me. Instead, I moved through heavy silence, my breathing harsh. When I shone my flashlight down, I saw the bracket still attached to the far wall. The dark patches around it looked bigger, like mold had grown in creeping tendrils. I descended. The air was thick and cloying. That odor of decay intensified, turning my stomach. As my light hit the far wall, I froze. The bracket was no longer empty. There sat a plaque, and upon it was Bryce's head, where dog heads used to be. My mind could not process this at first. The shape was so hideous. I thought maybe it was just a joke or a twisted mannequin, but then I recognized the features, contorted in agony, eyes wide and glassy. The hair around his scalp was matted with dried blood. I let out a choked scream that echoed off the walls, staggering backward until I hit the opposite side of the basement. The flashlight flickered, revealing more details. The bracket had been adapted somehow, now fitting around the edges of Bryce's face, a ring of blood crusted where metal met flesh. And beneath his hairline, I saw patches of coarse, coppery fur, bristling in uneven clusters, like a dog's coat sprouting from human skin. My flashlight trembled as I forced it lower. The jaw. Dear God, the jaw looked elongated, teeth bared in a feral sneer. The entire lower half of his face, from the cheeks down, seemed to be in the process of stretching forward, as if it were mid-transformation. No matter how much I wanted to run, my legs felt anchored. Then I heard a noise in the corner, a quiet shifting. My eyes flicked there. Something pale moved, large and hunched like a man, but with a muzzle. There was Doghead, fused to the neck of a body. Bryce's body. It was hairless in patches, fresh fur sprouting in others. A pale arm and a twisted paw-like limb. It was breathing in slow rasps, each exhale so reminiscent of those phone calls that my bones nearly turned to water. It raised its face. Or was it Bryce's face? Was it Doghead's face? Or both? And it smiled. God, that smile. That grin was a horrible echo of Bryce's warming smile, the corners of the mouth curling into a parody of comfort. I swear I saw recognition in its eyes, something faint in there that might have been Bryce. But I bolted, stumbling up the stairs, my screams lost in the furious pounding of my heart. If it was coming after me, I did not stick around to find out. I ran straight to my car, the swirling clouds overhead closing in. The seatbelt took 3 tries before I could click it. My hands were shaking just that much. I tore from the driveway, gravel spitting behind me. My mind was a chaos of shock and terror, not sure if I was even seeing reality anymore or some monstrous hallucination. I did what I thought was right. I called the police. They told me to wait at a gas station nearby while they checked, so I did. But an hour later, the officer claimed the basement was empty. No sign of a bracket, no sign of a body. Just dust and junk. "Ma'am, The officer said gently, "Are you sure you saw?" He was just doing his job, probably. But the doubt in his voice made me want to scream. I drove then. I didn't know where. I just left, thoughts reeling with dread, confusion, and guilt. I drove until I found a decent motel and locked myself in a room, and I lay awake all night, replaying what I'd seen. My friend's severed head on the wall. Or was he really severed? I recalled that half-formed muzzle, the slow shift of muscle and fur. Something alive, and yet not. Eventually, I made my way home, though nothing felt like home anymore. Sometimes I'd pass a reflective surface and catch a glimpse of something that wasn't quite my face, like a muzzle forming, bridging my nose. Of course, it's just the corner of my eye, playing tricks, or so I tell myself. I have no proof of that either. And I have the sense that one night, maybe soon, I'm gonna wake up to find it standing at the foot of my bed, panting softly, copper-brown fur glistening in the darkness. The transformation incomplete, but unstoppable. Maybe it wants a new occupant, a new host. Maybe it just wants me. I still smell burning fur when I switch off the lights. And sometimes in the silence I hear that sound again. The deep rasp of a dog's pant. It's close enough that I feel the exhalation on my neck. I flick on the lamp to reveal an empty room, but emptiness isn't comfort. Not anymore. Because what if it's found a deeper darkness to hide in until I sleep again? Every night, I wonder how long it'll take to find me. I smell it again. Wet breath just behind my shoulder. I need to turn the lights on now. Forgive me if I stop here. I have to keep it away. I have to try. The first time I read Anansi's Goatman story, it scared the living daylights out of me. I didn't know about the Goatman legend before that, but that creature became a monster that challenged skinwalkers for scariest mimic of all time. I didn't know I'd ever find another Goatman story to disturb me like that, until someone sent me this. This story is called I Watched the Goatman Kill My Friend, from Burlig Factory, and I dare you to go camping after listening to this. I decided to write this story because of some news I recently heard. A few hikers went missing near the Patuxent Research Refuge. Officially, they're saying it's the terrain, the weather, people getting lost like they often do. But I think it's something else. I know because I was there 7 years ago in those same woods, and I saw what they won't find in any search grid. I live in Oregon now. I haven't been back to Maryland since that weekend, and I haven't spoken to most of the people who were with me. We made an agreement, the 5 of us, that we wouldn't bring it up, that we'd get on with our lives and pretend it was nothing more than panic and exhaustion, tired, scared minds playing tricks on us in the dark. But at the time of writing this, people are missing out there, and I don't want to keep quiet anymore. It was October 2018, early in the month, before the leaves had really turned. I was 24 years old, working a nothing job in Silver Spring, living in a shared house with too many people. My friend Gabe had been planning a trip for a while. He was big into urban exploration then, always dragging us out to abandoned hospitals or closed down malls. But this time, he'd found something special, he said. Old infrastructure around the Governor's Bridge area, near the research refuge, buildings that had been left to rot when they reallocated funding in the 90s. There were 5 of us going. Gabe and I had known each other since high school, the planner type. He always brought maps and backup plans for these kinds of trips. Christian came because he wanted photographs for some portfolio he was building. He was a skeptical guy and did not believe in anything that he couldn't document, which should tell you something about what happened later. Terry was the one who kept everyone's spirits up. He told stories and jokes in equal rates. And Matthew, who I didn't know very well then, but who turned out to be the most sensible among us. A quiet guy. Competent, though. The plan was simple. Friday evening, drive out, camp somewhere in the woods near the refuge boundary, spend Saturday exploring the abandoned sites, then pack up Sunday morning. We found a spot off an old road, maybe a quarter-mile hike in. It was isolated, but not in a dangerous way. We could hear the occasional car in the far distance. Setting up camp took an hour. Gabe had insisted on proper gear, good tents, a decent cooking setup. By the time we had everything ready, it was fully dark. We built a fire and cooked some sausages, and we drank beer. It all felt exactly like it was supposed to feel. Like freedom, like we were getting away. It was Terry who brought up the Goatman. "You know, we're in Goatman territory," he said, poking at the fire with a long stick. He had that grin he always got when he was about to wind someone up. Christian groaned. "Not this again." "What's the Goatman?" Matthew asked. "A local legend," Christian said, before Terry could answer. "Creepypasta before creepypasta existed. Some guy with an axe who supposedly attacks teenagers in cars." "It's more than that," Terry said. He was enjoying this. "It's from the 70s, around Beltsville mostly. Some kids parking on Lover's Lane hear this sound, like metal dragging on the road. Then something hits the car. They drive off, screaming, and when they get to a gas station, they find axe marks in the roof. Deep ones. And hair, too. Thick, brown hair. Goat hair." "Bullcrap," Christian said. "Probably," Terry agreed. "But there's a lot of stories from around here. Things people saw near the Agricultural Research Center. Some folks said it was an experiment gone wrong. Half man, half goat. Others said it was older than that. Something that lived in these woods before there were any research centers at all. And now it wanders around with an axe attacking horny teenagers," Christian said. "Very plausible." We laughed. Even Matthew laughed. It was the right kind of story for a night in the woods. Scary enough to give you a little thrill. Stupid enough that you didn't actually believe it. The fire burned low. We talked about other things. And then around midnight, we turned in. I remember that first night because of how normal it was. I slept fine. If I heard anything unusual, I just don't recall it. The woods were dense and the sounds carried in a weird way. Sometimes you'd hear something that seemed very close that was probably half a mile away. But that's just how the woods are. That's just darkness and your ears adjusting. Saturday morning was clear and cold. We had coffee and instant porridge. Then we broke camp partially. We left the tents up, but secured everything else. Then we headed out to explore. The old sites were better than we'd hoped. There were these concrete bridge supports covered in graffiti, and a crumbling park service building with the roof collapsed in. There were equipment sheds with rusted machinery still inside. Christian was happy, taking photos of everything. We climbed things we probably shouldn't have climbed, and explored buildings we probably shouldn't have entered. It was exactly what we wanted, and why we came out here in the first place. By late afternoon, we were hiking back towards camp. following this trail along the refuge boundary. That's when Christian spotted it. A building set back from the path, barely visible through overgrowth. An old research station, he thought. He wanted to photograph it before we lost the light. "We should head back," Gabe said, checking his phone. "It'll be dark in 40 minutes. 20 minutes, Christian said. "Just let me get some shots. This is perfect." We debated it. In the end, we went. It was close enough, we thought. We could make it. The station was half collapsed, concrete walls thick with ivy and moss. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades, though it couldn't have been. The refuge had only been established in the 30s, and this building looked more modern than that. 2 stories, or what remained of them. Windows like empty eye sockets. "Great light," Christian said, already framing shots. We poked around while he worked. The building was more intact than it looked from outside. You could still get into some of the ground floor rooms, though the upper level was basically gone. There was debris everywhere, broken glass, chunks of concrete, water damage, animal droppings. Matthew was the one who mentioned the smell. "Something died in here," he said. He was standing near a doorway that led deeper into the building. "It smells wrong." He was right. It was that wet fur smell, thick and organic, mixed with something sharper. I didn't want to go closer, but Christian did, camera raised. "Oh, Jesus," he said, and stopped. We crowded behind him. The room beyond the doorway was larger than the others. Might have been a laboratory once, and there was evidence someone had been living there, or something had. Not a homeless camp, it wasn't that. There were no sleeping bags or discarded food containers, no needles or bottles. What there was, though, there were bones. Animal bones. Too big for rats, but too small for deer. They almost looked arranged somehow, though I couldn't tell you the pattern. They were piled in corners, broken open for the marrow. And hair, clumps of it, matted and dark, stuck to the walls and scattered across the floor. The walls themselves had marks in them, deep scratches in the concrete, gouged out like something had been sharpening claws. We should go," Matthew said. Christian was still taking photos, but his hands weren't as steady as they were before. "We should go right now," Matthew said again. That's when I noticed how dark it was getting. The light had that golden going gray quality that means you've got about 15 minutes before you're in real twilight. We'd been there longer than we should have been. We left in a hurry. Christian took a last few shots of the exterior, and then we were walking fast back along the trail, nobody doing much talking. The woods were getting that pressed-in feeling they get at dusk, when all the space between the trees seems to shrink. Everything felt closer than it was before. Terry made a joke about us running away from nothing, but it fell flat, and we walked faster. I started to feel something then, like I was being watched. A sense that something was very wrong, that you can't name, but your body understands perfectly well. I kept wanting to look behind me, but I didn't. None of us did. I think because we all sensed that if we looked back, we might see something we didn't want to see. We made it to camp just as the light was going. Everything was fine. Our tents were untouched, our gear exactly as we left it. We got the fire going and cooked dinner, and the relief we felt was immense. We'd spooked ourselves, that was all. Old buildings in the woods at twilight, our imaginations running wild. We laughed about it, and Terry started telling jokes again. But that smell came back after full dark. Matthew was the first to notice. He went still with his fork halfway to his mouth, just listening. And then he sniffed. Do you smell that? We did. It was the same smell from the station. Wet fur and rot. But stronger now, much, much stronger. And it wasn't coming from one direction. It seemed to move around the edge of our camp, circling just beyond where the fire could reach. Maybe there's a dead animal nearby, Gabe said. Then we heard the movement, heavy footfalls in the underbrush heading north. We all grabbed our flashlights and shined them at the trees. The beams cut through the dark, illuminating trunks and branches, but nothing else. But something was definitely out there. For maybe an hour, we heard it moving around us, always staying just out of sight. There were branches snapping and that heavy tread. At one point, there was a sound, like something large dragging against bark. We kept the fire going high. Not one of us thought we should go investigate. Nobody suggested leaving either, though. Hiking out in the dark seemed worse than just staying put, staying together. That's when Terry freaked out.
Did you hear that?
He stood up, staring out into the woods.
Holy crap, someone just called my name.
I didn't hear anything, Terry, Christian replied.
No, man, that was Amy's voice.
Amy was his girlfriend. She was back in Rockville, nowhere near these woods.
That was definitely Amy.
We sat there in silence. The fire crackled. I was about to tell Terry he was hearing things when I heard it too.
Grayson.
My mother's voice coming from the trees to the east, calling my name the way she used to when I was a kid and dinner was ready. Gabe heard his sister and Christian heard his father. Matthew heard his ex-girlfriend, the one who'd moved to California just a year ago. The voices all came from different directions, never the same place twice. They were perfect mimicries. They weren't recordings. There was too much life in them, too much personality. But they were wrong in some other way. There was something underneath them, something that made my skin crawl. None of us moved from that fire. Christian had his flashlight trained on the trees, sweeping back and forth.
This isn't real, he kept saying. This isn't possible.
Then his beam landed on something. It was between two oak trees, maybe 30 yards out, standing motionless. The light hit it for just a second before Christian jerked the flashlight away with a sound like he'd been punched in the gut. But I'd seen it. We all had seen it. Something was there, hunched forward with massive shoulders, too wide for a normal man. But the head was what really stuck out, a silhouette with horns curved and thick and a jutting snout. The eyes reflected back, bright and flat, utterly without anything I'd call consciousness. In the blink of an eye, it was gone. Christian's flashlight was shaking so badly by then, the beam was practically useless.
We need to leave, Terry said. We need to get to the cars right now.
It's a quarter mile in the dark, Gabe said. Through the woods, with that thing out there.
We can't stay here.
We can't go either. We argued about it, voices rising. Eventually, we decided we'd stay together by the fire until first light, then pack up fast and leave. We had weapons of a sort, a camping hatchet, knives, heavy mag lights. We'd keep the fire big. We'd take turns watching. It was only a few hours until dawn, right? And that was the longest night of my life. This thing circled our camp continuously. Sometimes we'd see movement in the darkness, just at the edge of what we could perceive. Sometimes we'd hear it, with its heavy breathing like bellows and the snapping of branches. Once, around 2 a.m., we heard something that sounded like laughter,
low and thick and absolutely inhuman. But it was certainly laughter. The voices continued intermittently. People we knew, people we'd loved, calling our names from the dark, asking us to come see them, telling us they were hurt, that they needed our help, and to come quick. But we didn't go. We huddled by that fire, and we fed it everything we could reach without leaving the light. Around 4 a.m., everything went silent. The sudden absence of sound was worse than the noise could have been. We sat there hardly breathing at all, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Minutes passed, and the fire crackled. Far away, a real animal, a raccoon, I think, began to move through the brush. "Maybe it left," Terry whispered. We weren't about to believe that. Dawn came slowly, the way it does when you've been up all night waiting for it. The darkness went gray, then lighter gray, then that pale wash that means morning is finally, actually arriving. We could see the trees around us again, and we could see that there was nothing there. We were exhausted and terrified, but it was morning now. Time to pack up. Time to get the heck out. We moved quickly, taking down tents and shoving everything into bags without bothering to organize it properly. We were all so focused and in a hurry that we didn't really talk. We kept checking the woods, but in the daylight, everything looked normal. Just trees and forest. Nothing to be afraid of. I remember thinking as we finished packing that we'd made it through. That whatever that thing was, it was a creature of the dark. So now in the light, we were safe. Like it was some Hollywood monster movie with rules. I also remember thinking we'd just have to make it to the service road, to the cars, then this would all be over. But I was very, very wrong. We threw everything into the bags without care for organization. Tent poles jabbed through fabric. Sleeping bags went in still half stuffed. Nobody spoke except to say things like, "Got it," or "Ready." We moved as a unit, constantly checking the trees around us, though in the morning light there was nothing to see. The hike out felt longer than a quarter mile. None of us wanted to be last in line. We kept bunching up and practically walked on each other's heels. Eventually, we forced ourselves to spread out a bit, but then we ended up bunching up soon after. Still, the woods were just woods in the daylight. There was bird song and sun coming through the leaves, a chipmunk scattering away from the path. Normal, so beautifully normal. Terry tried to lighten things up halfway through. "So that's it for camping, right? We're all in agreement? Next trip is somewhere with room service." It got a weak laugh. Christian and Gabe started discussing what we'd actually seen, or what we thought we'd seen. The silhouette, the horns. It could have been a deer, Christian suggested. At worst, it could have been someone screwing with us, Gabe said. Matthew kept quiet. But then Matthew was always quiet. We reached the service road, and there were the cars, exactly where we'd left them. Gabe's SUV and Christian's sedan, covered in pollen and tree debris but otherwise untouched. The sight of them was absurdly reassuring. Metal and glass and modernity. We loaded the gear quick, shoving bags into trunks and back seats. I remember that moment clearly. We were about to get in. I had my hand on the door handle of Gabe's SUV, and I felt that wash of relief too. We'd made it, and whatever that thing was, it was behind us now. We would just drive away, and this would become one of those stories you tell at parties, embellishing it a little more each time, until even you're not sure what really happened. I then did a mental count of the gear, making sure we hadn't left anything. Tent, sleeping bags, cooking equipment, cooler. Then I counted the people. 5. Gabe, Christian, Terry, Matthew, me. 5. That was right. That was the number that had come out here on Friday. But something was wrong. I stood there with my hand on the door handle, trying to figure out what was bothering me. Sleep deprivation, I told myself. Stress. We'd been up all night, scared out of our minds. Of course I felt strange. "Hey, you good?" Gabe asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just tired." We split up between the cars. I rode with Gabe and Terry. Christian and Matthew took Christian's sedan. "We'd caravan out," Gabe said, sticking together until we hit the highway. That old road was rutted and overgrown. Branches would scrape against the windows. It took about 15 minutes of careful driving before we made it to pavement. Then another 20 minutes to the next route, heading north toward the Beltway. Normal roads, normal traffic. The world going about its business like nothing happened. Gabe suggested stopping for gas. We were all running low and nobody wanted to risk getting separated. We pulled into a station just south of Laurel, both cars side by side at the pumps. Everyone got out. The sun was fully up now, bright and ordinary. People were filling up their tanks and going into the convenience store for coffee and lottery tickets. I watched an old woman put air in her tires. "I need coffee," Terry said, "and a piss. Not necessarily in that order." We went inside, all 5 of us. Christian made a joke about how terrible we probably smelled. The clerk was a tired-looking woman in her 50s who didn't even glance up from her phone. I got some coffee and stood by the Kramer station, doctoring it with too much sugar. That's when I really looked at the group, at my friends. Everything seemed fine. Tired and rumpled, but fine. Terry was joking with Gabe by the chip rack. Christian was in the bathroom. Matthew was studying the cooler full of energy drinks with that focused look he got sometimes. But still, something was off. I couldn't place it. A mannerism? The way someone was standing? I kept watching, trying to figure out what my hind brain was screaming about. Back outside, pumping gas, Christian suggested breakfast. "We should probably eat something real," he said. "Make sure everyone's actually okay before we all head home." There was a diner just up the road. We agreed to it easily. All of us were hungry and none of us wanted to be alone yet, I think. We followed each other there, 3 minutes away, pulling into the parking lot. It had that chrome and neon aesthetic that promised mediocre food and strong coffee. Inside, we took a booth near the back. We ordered eggs and pancakes and hash browns. The normalcy of everything was overwhelming. Menus and laminated tables and a waitress who called us hun. Less than 2 hours ago, we'd been in the woods, being stalked by something that shouldn't exist. Now we were in a diner, enjoying eggs and pancakes. We talked. Small talk at first. How terrible each other looked. How much sleep we would need to feel human again. Then, inevitably, we talked about what happened. "I kept thinking we overreacted," Christian said. "I mean, we saw something. But in the dark, with flashlights, your mind fills in the blanks. It could have been..." "It wasn't a freaking deer, Christian," Terry interrupted. "I know what deer look like. I'm not saying it was a deer. I'm saying maybe it wasn't what we thought it was." "And the voices?" Gabe asked quietly. Nobody had an answer for that. Matthew had been quiet, working through his eggs methodically. Eventually, he said, "The worst part was when we heard it circling the camp, when Terry was on watch, and it got close to the tents." I looked up from my coffee. When was that?" I asked. "Around 1, maybe? 1:30? When you and Gabe were sleeping, and Terry was keeping watch." "Matthew," I said slowly, "you weren't at the camp at the time. You went to get water from the creek." "No, I didn't," he said, smiling. "I was right there." "No, you went to refill the bottles. You were gone for like 10 minutes. We were worried about you." The smile didn't waver. "I think you're misremembering. I was there the whole time." I looked around the table. Gabe shrugged. He'd been half asleep. He hadn't seen. Christian looked confused and Terry was frowning, trying his best to remember. "Pretty sure you were there, man," Terry said to Matthew. But I knew Matthew had gone to the creek because I'd watched him leave myself. Watched him walk into the dark with the empty water bottles, terrified he would never come back. I looked at Matthew carefully now. Really looked. It was Matthew. Same face, same build, same clothes he'd been wearing yesterday. He even sat the same way and was slightly hunched over his food. Everything was right, but everything was wrong. "Excuse me," I said, and I slid out of the booth. I headed to the bathroom. In the mirror, I looked like crap. Dark circles, pale skin, hair sticking up all over. I ran some water and splashed my face, trying to think more clearly. 5 people had gone into those woods. Me, Gabe, Christian, Terry, Matthew. 5 people were at this diner. The math was right. So why did I feel so wrong? I counted again. In the bathroom, me. At the table, 4 others. 5 total. That was correct. So why were my hands shaking? When I came back to the table, everyone was still eating and talking. I slid into my seat and just watched, trying to figure out what my instincts were screaming about. Matthew picked up his fork. I raised an eyebrow. He held it the way a child would hold it, overhand. It was a small thing to notice. Maybe he'd always held his fork that way and I'd never noticed before. Then he smiled at something that Christian said, and the smile seemed a bit too wide. And his eyes. There was something in his eyes that wasn't quite right. Not obviously wrong, but off. I couldn't help myself. "Matthew," I said, "you remember that concert we went to in Baltimore? What was that band's name?" He looked at me. "Which concert?" "The one at the Auto Bar, 2 years ago. You spilled beer all over yourself." "Oh, right," he said. "That was, God, I can't remember the name. An indie rock band?" "Yeah. Local guys, right?" Matthew and I had never been to a concert together. We barely knew each other before this trip. He was Gabe's friend from work. "You're not Matthew," I said. The table went silent. Everyone stared at me. "What?" Matthew said, still smiling. "You're not Matthew." Gabe leaned forward. "Dude, what are you talking about? Have you gone insane?" "That's not him. That is not Matthew." Christian put his hand on my arm. "Man, you've been up all night. You're exhausted. We all are." "Look at him," I said. "Really look at him." They looked. They saw Matthew, tired and confused, watching me, concerned. "I think you need some sleep," Terry said quietly. "Maybe we should take you to—" "Matthew and I have never went to a concert together," I said. "That was a test, and he answered it." "Maybe he just went along with it because you sounded so sure," Gabe said. I looked at Matthew, just looked at him, and he looked back, still smiling a too wide smile. "Where is he?" I asked. "What did you do with the real Matthew?" "Oh God, man, I think you're having some kind of episode," Christian said. His hand was still on my arm trying to anchor me. "Last night was screwed up, yeah, but we're all screwed up. But Matthew's right here." But I was certain now. The thing from the woods was sitting across from me, wearing Matthew's face. "I need air," I said, and I pulled away from Christian. I slid out of the booth and walked fast toward the door. Outside in the parking lot, I leaned against Gabe's SUV, breathing hard. What was I supposed to do about this? Scream, "Help me, my friend's been replaced!" Everyone would think I'm insane. Maybe I was insane. But if I wasn't, if that thing was really in there pretending to be Matthew, then the real Matthew was still in those woods, hurt, or worse. The diner door opened. All 4 of them came out, walking toward me carefully, like I was a rabid animal. "Hey," Gabe said gently, "let's talk about this." "You need to see a doctor," Christian said. "I'm serious, man. I think the stress—" "I'm fine," I said. I need to go back." "Back home?" "No, to the campsite. I left something there." It was a lie. I'd never been good at lying, but I needed to search for Matthew. Needed to find him before. "We're not going back there," Christian said flatly. "No freaking way." "Then I'll go alone." "That's an even worse idea," Terry said. We argued, raising our voices in the parking lot of that diner, while other customers came and went. Gabe tried to mediate. Christian insisted I needed professional help. Terry just looked uncomfortable. Matthew, though, he stood slightly apart, watching everything go down, but not saying anything. Finally, Gabe sighed. Okay. I'll go back with you. We'll do a quick search, check the campsite for what you lost, and you'll see that there's nothing wrong. We can all go home and sleep this off." "I'll go too," Matthew said. The words sent ice down my spine. "You don't have to," I started. "I want to help," he said, that smile again. "We should stick together." I looked at Gabe, trying to communicate something with my eyes. Don't let him come. But Gabe just looked too tired for this. He was also worried and slightly annoyed. "Fine," Christian said. 3 of you go. Terry and I will just wait here. We'll give you 2 hours. If you're not back by then, we're gonna call the cops." "Fair enough," Gabe said. So that was it. 3 of us would go back to those woods. Me, Gabe, and the thing pretending to be Matthew. We got in Gabe's SUV, me in the front passenger seat, Matthew in the back. Gabe started the engine. "This is a waste of time," Gabe muttered, pulling out of the parking lot. "There's nothing at that campsite." I watched Matthew in the side mirror. He sat very still, his hands folded in his lap. He looked out the window at the passing scenery. I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. That wasn't Matthew, and whatever it was, I was about to be alone with it in the woods. The drive back to that old road took 25 minutes. Neither Gabe nor I spoke much. Matthew said nothing at all. When we pulled onto the rutted dirt road, heading back toward where we'd camped, my stomach turned. Gabe parked near where we'd parked before. We got out. The woods were completely silent. "Let's make this quick," Gabe said. "What did you leave?" I couldn't remember what I'd claimed to have left, if I claimed anything at all. My mind was blank. Behind us, Matthew smiled. "Lead the way," he said softly. And we walked back into the trees. The hike back to the campsite was worse the second time. Gabe kept asking what I'd left behind, and I kept giving vague answers. "My backpack," I said. "Important stuff in it." He didn't push, but I could feel his frustration building. Behind us, Matthew said nothing. I kept turning to check on him. He was always there, maintaining the same distance, the same calm expression on his face. He was in no hurry, not worried one bit. We reached the campsite around noon. The fire pit was cold, full of white ash. Our footprints from the morning were still visible in the soft earth, but there was no sign of anything else. No sign of Matthew, the real Matthew. "Okay, where is it?" Gabe said. "What did you leave?" "I need to search around here," I said. "Can you help me look?" "Look for what?" "Just help me." He sighed but started walking the perimeter of our old site. I peered into the woods, looking for Matthew. Behind me, the other Matthew stood very still, watching. "I'm gonna try further in," I said, pointing toward where we'd run from last night, toward where we'd seen the thing between the trees. "This is insane," Gabe said, but he followed. We pushed deeper into the refuge, off the trail now, moving through undergrowth. I kept my eyes open for Matthew, any sign or trace of him. Gabe was getting more irritated with each passing minute. This Matthew followed behind us like a shadow. I then found tracks in a patch of soft ground near a fallen log. They looked like large cloven hoofprints, pressed deep into the ground. Pretty recent. The edges were still sharp, not eroded by weather. "Look," I said to Gabe. He crouched down, studying them. "These are... what are these?" "You know what they are." The tracks led deeper in, toward a steep slope I hadn't noticed before. The ground dropped away suddenly, a ravine maybe 20 feet deep, thick with brush and vines. "We should go back," Gabe said. "This is crazy, we..." "Help." I heard it then, a sound from below, crying, moaning, something human in pain. "Did you hear that?" Gabe nodded, his eyes wide. We approached the edge carefully. I called down. "Hello? Is someone down there?" The sound came again. I was certain then. It was human, and they needed help. "We have to go down," I said. "That's a bad idea. Someone's hurt down there." I found a spot where the slope was less steep, where exposed roots might serve as handholds. We started to descend without waiting for Gabe's agreement. Behind me, I heard him curse, then start climbing down after me. It was treacherous. Loose soil, roots that gave way under your weight, branches that scratched and grabbed. I slipped twice, barely catching myself. But I made it to the bottom, landing in ankle-deep leaf litter. The sound was closer now, to my left, hidden in heavy brush. I pushed through, and I found him. Matthew. The real Matthew. He was partially buried in leaves and debris, his leg bent at a bad angle, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. But his eyes were open and alert. When he saw me, something like relief flooded his face. "Thank God," he whispered. I thought it would come back." Gabe crashed through the brush behind me, taking one look at Matthew and going completely pale. "Jesus Christ, what happened?" "It took me," Matthew said. His voice was barely there. "Last night, during my watch, I was away from the fire for a minute, getting water. Something grabbed me from behind, dragged me away. I couldn't scream. My leg..." I looked up at the edge of the ravine. The other Matthew was standing there, looking down at us, not moving to help, not calling out to ask if we'd found anything, just watching. I watched as the figure's posture began to shift, subtle at first, the shoulders broadening, the spine curving forward, the proportions becoming all wrong. "Gabe," I said quietly, "look up there." He looked up, and he saw it too. The thing that had been pretending to be Matthew was dropping the pretense. Its back hunched, head lowering, limbs extending. The human shape it had worn like a costume began to fall away.
"What the heck?"
Gabe breathed.
"What is that?"
It stood at the edge of the ravine, its true form revealed now. Bipedal, 7 feet tall, fur covered with massive shoulders. The head was goat-like, elongated snout and curved horns and all that. But its eyes were forward-facing like a predator's, like a human's. It looked down at us and made a sound that wasn't quite laughter, not quite the bleat of a goat, but something in between. It had been with us since we left the camp this morning, sitting in the diner, riding in Gabe's car, walking beside us through these woods.
"No signal,"
Gabe said, looking at his phone with shaking hands.
"I don't have any freaking signal down here."
The goat man started descending the ravine, slowly, taking its time because it knew we were trapped.
"We have to move. We need to go somewhere now," I said.
Gabe and I pulled Matthew up, supporting him between us. His leg couldn't take any weight. He bit back a scream as we started to move, crashing through the undergrowth along the ravine bottom. Behind us, the thing followed. Not rushing. These were its woods, its territory. It knew every inch. The ravine opened up into a wider creek bed. We followed it, desperate for any path that led out. Matthew was in bad shape. His breathing was shallow and his weight became heavier between us. We were slowing down.
"We can't stop," Gabe panted. "Keep moving."
The creek forked ahead. One branch seemed to curve back toward the interior of the refuge, darker and more overgrown. The other looked slightly more open, might lead out toward the roads. We took the open one, staggering along it for 10, maybe 15 minutes. Matthew's head lolled against my shoulder. Then I realized we'd chosen wrong. The trees were getting denser. There were no signs of trails or roads, no signs of traffic. We were heading deeper into the refuge, not away from it.
"Gabe,"
I said,
"we have to go back."
He was about to answer when we saw it. Ahead of us, blocking our path, stood the goat man. It had circled around, herded us deliberately. This wasn't a chase. It was a hunt, and we were prey that didn't understand that game.
"Put me down,"
Matthew whispered.
"Hide me. You need to do something."
"We're not leaving you," Gabe said.
"You don't have a choice."
We lowered Matthew behind a fallen log, covering him with branches as best we could. Then Gabe and I grabbed what we could find: heavy branches, rocks, pathetic weapons against something like that. It watched us prepare, almost curious. Then it charged. I've been in exactly one fight in my life. A shoving match outside a bar when I was 22. This wasn't a fight. This was being hit by a truck. It crashed into Gabe first, taking him down hard. They went into the creek bed together, water splashing up. Gabe was screaming, trying to get his arms up to protect his face, but that thing was on top of him, impossibly strong, the goat head snapping down. I hit it with the branch I'd been holding, brought it down on its back with everything I had. The branch shattered. But it worked. The goat man turned its attention to me. It rose up from Gabe, pivoting with a fluid grace that something that big shouldn't have. Its eyes locked on mine. I could smell its breath, rancid and metallic. Something animal, something ancient. I could see its teeth. There were too many of them. It took a step forward. I stumbled back, tripping over a root, and I went down hard. Gabe tackled it from behind then. I don't know where he found that strength. He was bleeding from his face and chest, but he hit that thing with his full weight, wrapping his arms around its torso. "Go!" he screamed at me. "Get Matthew and go!" The goat man spun, throwing Gabe against a tree. The sound of impact was terrible. But Gabe held on, dragging the thing down, giving me the seconds I needed. It was the worst moment of my life, worse than anything that came after, because I ran. I pulled Matthew up, got him over my shoulder in a fireman's carry, and I ran back the way we'd came, leaving Gabe there, fighting something that couldn't be fought, buying us time with his life. Behind me, Gabe's screams cut through the woods until they stopped. There was only silence then, and then the sound of heavy footsteps. It was coming. I crashed through the underbrush, Matthew's dead weight nearly pulling me down with each step. My lungs were on fire, my legs were shaking, and still I ran. The creek bed, then the fork. Back the other way now, the way we should have gone in the first place. I couldn't hear anything over my own ragged breathing and the sound of branches breaking as I pushed through. Then I saw the trail, an actual marked trail with a wooden sign and a posted map. Signs of humanity, of order, of safety. I staggered onto it, nearly falling, caught myself on a trail marker. Matthew groaned against my shoulder. I kept moving along the trail, praying it would lead somewhere, anything but deeper into this nightmare. The trail was well maintained, gravel under my feet. It curved through the trees, marked with occasional signs. I followed it because I had no other options, and I could feel it behind me. Not see it, it was staying just out of sight now, moving parallel to the trail through the trees. But I knew it was there. I could hear the branches shifting, and I could sense its attention fixed on us. The trail sloped upward. My legs were screaming, and Matthew was barely conscious. His breathing was shallow and fast. I climbed, one step after another, because stopping meant death. Finally, I saw pavement. The trail ended at a paved park road, empty but beautifully, impossibly real. Asphalt and painted lines and a metal road sign. I stumbled out onto it, went to my knees, Matthew sliding off my shoulder. I looked back at the tree line. It was there. The goat man stood at the edge of the woods, exactly where the pavement began. It was watching us. It wasn't moving forward. It couldn't, I thought, or it wouldn't. Something about the boundary of the forest, the hard edge of civilization, held it back. Was it because it was in its true form? We stared at each other for a moment. Then it stepped backward into the trees. Like that, it was gone. I couldn't move. Matthew was unconscious beside me on the road. We'd gotten out, we had made it. But not Gabe. I heard an engine. I looked up to see headlights approaching. A park service vehicle came around the corner. The ranger inside slowed down as he saw us collapsed in the middle of the road. He got out, asking us questions I couldn't yet process. He asked if we were okay, what happened, if we needed an ambulance. I looked past him toward the woods, towards where the darkness between the trees, where something that shouldn't exist might be waiting, where my friend had died, buying us the time to escape. "There's someone else. There's someone else in the woods. We have to," I said. But even as I said it, I knew there was nothing left to find, nothing left they could do. The ranger was on his radio, calling for medical support, asking our names and where we'd been. I looked at Matthew, still breathing but only barely, then back at the woods. I knew with absolute certainty that whatever had happened in there, whatever we'd encountered, the world was not going to believe us, could not believe us. The woods kept their secret, and one of them was Gabe. 15 minutes is how long it took for the ambulance to arrive, but that felt like hours. Matthew had stopped responding. His breathing was so shallow, I wasn't sure he was going to make it. His skin was cold, like a corpse. Shock, a paramedic said. She tried to keep him warm with a blanket. EMTs worked on him. He was critical. They got him stabilized enough to move and loaded him up quickly. I was ambulatory, they said. Cuts and scratches, exhaustion, possible concussion, but I could walk. As the ranger pounded me with more questions, I answered. "Bear," I said. The lie was instinctive. "Bear attack. My friend, Gabe, he's still out there. There were 2 others, Christian and Terry, but they're waiting at the diner."
"Where did this happen?"
I tried to explain. The creek bed, the ravine, somewhere past the marked trails. Before long, my words weren't making sense. The ranger kept asking me to slow down, to breathe. They then loaded me into the ambulance with Matthew. As the doors closed, I got one last look at the woods. The trees were just trees in the afternoon light. Normal, seemingly innocent. But I knew better. At the hospital, Matthew went straight to surgery. He had a compound fracture of the femur, possible internal bleeding, severe dehydration. I was taken to an examination room where a doctor cleaned my cuts and checked me over. There were some bruised ribs, lacerations, exhaustion, but nothing life-threatening. Some police arrived while I was being stitched up. 2 cops, young and professional. They needed my statement about what happened. So I had to re-explain everything again. The female officer called it in, contacting the Laurel Police Department. She asked them to send over someone to the diner to check on the 2 men waiting there. She then came back into my examination room and said something that made my blood freeze. "Sir, the officers at the diner are confused. Your friends Christian and Terry are there, as you said, but so is Gabe. They said they've been waiting there since you left with Matthew." I stared at her. "That's not possible." "They're pretty certain. They say he's been with them for over 3 hours. He couldn't have been. He was with us. I watched him be attacked and..." She looked at her partner. The look said everything. I was in shock. I got a head injury. I was seeing things. "We need you to start from the beginning, please," she said carefully. So I did. Matthew pulled through, made a complete recovery, and you would never know what he had been through by just looking at him today. Terry and Christian are just fine. Still sometimes make fun of me for begging to go back to that god-awful clearing that day, just to get attacked by a bear. Gabe, though, he's a different story. It took me so long to trust him again. I'd watched who I thought was Gabe be attacked by the goat man. I'd heard his dying screams in the distance as I ran away. But when I saw him again in person, I was watching him like an interrogator, trusting nothing he did or said. Unlike the fake Matthew, though, Gabe, even after weeks, did not behave strangely. There was nothing off. Nothing except the misaligned events in my head. Gabe had come with me, had drove us back out to the woods, didn't he? Or is the goat man able to warp your thoughts and your mind entirely? I struggled for some time. When such an important and traumatic event makes absolutely no sense in your head, it can make you feel depressed, even psychotic. Eventually, like Matthew, I pulled through in my own way. Now, Gabe and I are the friends we used to be. To the others, they thought I drove out with Matthew to go find something back at the campsite, and that's the end of it. We've all agreed to stop bringing this up, likely just to keep my mental wounds from tearing back open.
It's stories like this that give me hope that a creepypasta renaissance might one day be upon us. Well, that is if this story is fake. Like many stories people send me, the author of this story claims it's true. If it is, I hope you find peace from these horrible events. If not, thank you for a chilling story. Good night. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails, and you can get my new one and only coffee over at eeriecast.store. Make your morning something to fear with the Morning Brew. Also, be sure to rate and follow Unexplained Encounters on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. If you'd rather, you can just subscribe to me on YouTube at Darkness Prevails. Thank you. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.